Hey. Welcome back to Eclipse Wizardry. We've got something fire today. What if Fleur's Veela blood chose Harry at age 10 and every witch who touched him lost their magic? Likes and subs keep us going. Alright, story time. Chapter 1, The Choosing the Cupboard under the stairs at number 4, Privet Drive smelled like old wood, dust, and the particular staleness of a space that had never been intended for a person to sleep in. Harry Potter knew that smell better than he knew almost anything else in the world. He knew the exact dimensions of the shelf above his head, the way the hot water pipe in the wall ticked at 2 in the morning, and the specific creak of the third stair above him, the one that meant Dudley was coming down for a midnight snack and might, if the mood took him, decide to kick the cupboard door a few times on his way past. He was 10 years old. He had been sleeping in this cupboard for as long as he could remember. Tonight was the 14th of July, and the heat was the thick, unmoving kind that settles over England in summer and refuses to leave. Harry lay on his back on his narrow cot with his eyes open, listening to the house breathe. Uncle Vernon's snoring came through the ceiling in long, grinding waves. Aunt Petunia had left the television on downstairs and forgotten to turn it off, and the blue flicker of it moved in the crack beneath the cupboard door. Some program about gardening. He could hear the host talking cheerfully about begonias. Harry was not thinking about begonias. He was thinking about the thing that had happened at school 3 days ago, the thing he had not told anyone about because there was no one to tell and also because he was fairly certain that if Uncle Vernon found out, the consequences would involve significantly less food for the next 2 weeks. The thing was this: Dudley's gang had cornered him behind the gym, the usual business, 4 of them and 1 of him, and Piers Polkiss had grabbed Harry's arm and twisted it behind his back while the others laughed. It had hurt. Harry had gone absolutely still the way he always did when there was no running room, waiting for it to be done. And then something had happened that he could not explain. There had been a sound, not really a sound, more like the idea of a sound, deep and resonant, like a bell struck at a frequency just below hearing, and the pain in his arm had stopped, and Piers had let go. Not been pushed off. Not been startled. Just let go, like a hand unclenching in sleep, and when Harry looked at Piers, the boy's face was strange, confused, distant, like he'd forgotten where he was. They'd all walked away. No one said anything. Dudley had looked back once with an expression Harry had never seen on his cousin's face before, something adjacent to wariness, and then they were gone. Harry had stood behind the gym for a long time afterward, turning his arm over and looking at the red marks where Piers' fingers had been. The marks had faded faster than they should have. He hadn't made the bell sound happen. He was almost certain of that. But it had happened, and it had been on his behalf, and that was the part that kept him awake at night, turning it over like a coin he'd found in the street that might be valuable or might be nothing. The television downstairs went to static. Harry heard it cut out, the sudden silence settling through the house, and in that silence, at 11:47 on the night of the 14th of July, something happened. It started in his chest. Not a pain, he would be clear about this in his memory for years afterward, not a pain at all, but a warmth, like swallowing something hot on a cold morning, except it spread outward instead of down. It moved through his ribs, across his shoulders, down his arms to his fingertips, and when it reached his hands, the space between his fingers glowed gold for exactly 3 seconds. Harry sat up. The gold was gone. But the warmth wasn't. It sat in his sternum like a coal, steady and breathing, and Harry pressed his hand flat against his chest and felt his own heartbeat, which was, he noticed this with the detached precision of a child who had learned to document his own anomalies, faster than usual, but not frightened. It was the heartbeat of someone who had just started running toward something. He didn't sleep for the rest of the night. He sat in the dark with his back against the wall and his knees to his chest, and he thought about the bell sound, and the gold light, and the warmth in his chest that didn't go away. By morning it had settled into something quieter, something he could almost ignore, like the awareness of a new tooth coming in. He didn't ignore it. He never ignored it. He catalogued it, the way he catalogued everything, because cataloging things was how he'd survived 10 years in this house. Across the channel, in a stone house outside Perpignan that smelled of lavender oil and the warm particular scent of feathers, 12-year-old Fleur Delacour woke up screaming. She came upright in her bed so fast that her pillow fell to the floor and her lamp went over, and the light that blazed from her in those first wild seconds was silver white and absolute, filling the room like a second moon had risen inside the walls. Her hair, normally the color of palest wheat, was incandescent. Her eyes were completely silver. The door opened before she had fully woken. Her grandmother stood in the doorway in a grey nightdress with her own hair loose around her shoulders, and she looked at Fleur with an expression that was not surprise. It was recognition, and calculation, and underneath both of those things, something that was very nearly fear. "Grandmère," Fleur said, and her voice came out strange, layered, the Veela resonance in it naked and uncontrolled the way it only was when she was very young or very frightened. "Grandmère, something happened." "I know." Her grandmother crossed the room in 4 strides, picked up the overturned lamp, and sat on the edge of Fleur's bed. She took both of Fleur's hands in hers, and her grip was firm and deliberate, grounding her. "Tell me what you felt." Fleur opened her mouth and found the words difficult, which never happened to her. Like a thread," she said finally. "Something pulled. Here." She pressed one hand to her collarbone. "And then there was warmth, and it was not mine, and it was very far away." Her grandmother was quiet for a moment. The silver light had faded from Fleur's hair and eyes, leaving her looking younger than 12, disheveled and uncertain in a way she almost never permitted herself to be. "A direction?" her grandmother asked. Fleur turned, without thinking, toward the northeast window. "Toward England." Her grandmother looked at the window for a long moment. Then she said, very quietly, "Oh, mon Dieu. What is it?" "It is something I hoped I would not see in my lifetime." Her grandmother's voice was not unkind, but it was grave in a way that made Fleur sit up straighter. "Ma petite, do you know the difference between the allure and the bond?" Fleur knew the allure. Every girl in her family knew it, the passive, involuntary Veela magnetism that drew people in against their better judgment, the shimmer in the air around them that made strangers want to please them. She had been managing it since she was 8, learning to modulate it the way one learned to keep one's voice down in a library. "The bond is different," her grandmother said, not waiting for the answer. "The allure is what we give without meaning to. The bond is what the blood chooses, beyond our will, beyond our knowledge. It has not happened in this family in 4 generations." She paused. "It has only ever happened 3 times in recorded Veela history." "What does it choose?" Her grandmother looked at her with that expression again, the one that was not quite fear but was not comfortable either. "A person," she said. "Somewhere in England, tonight, a person was chosen by your blood. And your magic, and that person's magic, are now in conversation whether either of you agrees to it or not." Fleur processed this. She was 12, but she was not a foolish 12-year-old, she was the kind of 12-year-old who had read all of her grandmother's books and argued about the ones she disagreed with. "What does it mean for the person?" "It means," her grandmother said carefully, "that anyone who tries to use magic against them, to harm, to bind, to control, will find that their magic does not cooperate the way it should. Over time, if it is persistent, that magic will weaken." She squeezed Fleur's hands. "It is a protection. Ancient, powerful, and entirely beyond anyone's ability to revoke. The blood chose. That is final." Fleur was quiet. Outside, a nightingale was singing in the lavender bushes. The heat of the southern French summer sat soft and heavy on the house. "Can I choose not to?" she started. "No." Her grandmother was gentle but definite. "You cannot undo the choosing. You can choose, later, whether you act on it. You can choose whether you seek this person out. You can choose a great many things. But the blood has already decided, and your magic has already reached across the water and found them, and nothing you or I or anyone else does will change that." Fleur looked at the northeast window for a long time. "How old are they?" she asked. Her grandmother's expression flickered. "About your age, I think. Perhaps younger." "Then it is not anything yet," her grandmother said firmly. "It is a connection. A recognition. What it becomes is years away and entirely up to both of you." She stood, smoothing her nightdress. "Sleep. In the morning we will talk more. I will write to your mother. Will you tell me everything you know about it?" Her grandmother paused at the door. Looked back. And for just a moment, underneath the gravity and the calculation, Fleur saw something that might have been admiration. "I will tell you everything," she said. "You deserve to know what your own blood has done." She closed the door. Fleur sat in the dark for a long time, one hand on her collarbone, feeling the warmth that was not hers, distant, faint, steady as a pulse. She turned again, without deciding to, toward England. Harry's second summer of knowing about the warmth was different from the first. He had catalogued it. He had tested its edges. And he had begun to notice things. He noticed, for example, that when Aunt Petunia used her magic, which she would have denied doing if anyone had asked, but Harry had watched her for years, and the way she pointed her finger at the fern in the kitchen window and the way it perked up afterward was not a coincidence. When she did that near him, sometimes her hand would tremble slightly afterward, like a plucked string. He noticed that when Mrs. Fig from down the road came to collect him one afternoon, and her cat, who had always hissed at Harry, suddenly sat quietly and let Harry scratch behind its ears, Mrs. Fig had watched this with an expression of complicated unease. He noticed, most significantly, that the compulsive blankness he had always felt when he thought too hard about magic, that thick, drowsy pull toward "don't think about it, don't ask questions, be normal," was fading. It was fading the way a bruise fades, slowly, from the edges in. By the time Harry was 11, it was gone. He didn't know it had been there until it was gone. That was the disorienting thing. Like a noise you've heard so long you've stopped hearing it, and then it stops, and the silence is almost loud. He began thinking about magic clearly and completely, following the thoughts wherever they went, and the thoughts went everywhere. They went to the incidents, the bell sound, the gold light in his hands, the way Piers Polkiss had let go of his arm like a marionette with cut strings. They went to the dreams he'd been having since he was 10, not nightmares, not the usual ones with the green light and the cold and the crying, but different dreams. Strange dreams with silver in them, and warmth, and sometimes a voice that was not quite audible, not quite any language he knew, but that felt like it was trying to tell him something. He thought about these things clearly, and he did not panic. He felt, with a certainty that he couldn't entirely explain, that whatever was happening was not happening to him in the way that bad things happened to him. It was something else. It was something that, for possibly the first time in his life, was on his side. He was sitting on the back garden wall eating a stolen apple when the first letter arrived. He saw the owl before it landed, a beautiful thing, black and white with a wingspan wider than Harry's arm spread, and it came out of a sky that had been completely empty a moment before and landed on the garden fence with the letter in its talons and looked at him with eyes that were ancient and gold and entirely too intelligent. The letter was addressed to Mr. H. Potter, the cupboard under the stairs, for Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey, and Harry looked at it for a long moment, standing in the back garden with the apple in his hand, and felt the warmth in his chest flare up like a stoked fire. He opened it right there. He didn't hide it. He didn't stuff it in his pocket and wait for a safe moment. He opened it and he read it, standing in the July sunshine, and when he was done reading he folded it back along its creases and stood very still for a few seconds. Then he looked at the owl. "There are going to be more of these, aren't there?" The owl blinked. "Right," Harry said. He finished his apple. He went inside. Aunt Petunia was in the kitchen when he walked through the back door, and she turned when she heard him, and then she saw his face, not frightened, not uncertain, just clear and purposeful in a way he had never quite looked before, and something shifted in her expression. She looked, for just a moment, like she was seeing something she recognized from a long time ago and had hoped never to see again. "There's a letter," Harry said. He put it on the kitchen table. "From a school called Hogwarts." He watched her. "I think you know what that is." Petunia stared at the letter. "Didn't touch it." The fern on the windowsill drooped very slightly, the way it always did when she was upset. "Yes," she said. Barely above a whisper. "I'm going to go," Harry said. Not a question. Not an argument opener. A statement of fact, made by someone who had already decided and was simply informing the relevant parties. Petunia looked up at him. Harry looked back. And the conversation that he had always imagined would be a battle, the confrontation he had rehearsed 100 times in the cupboard, the shouting, the appeals to Vernon, the being locked in and the letters accumulating, none of it happened. Petunia looked at him for a long, strange moment, and then she looked back at the letter, and she said, very quietly, "I'll need to talk to Vernon." "Okay," Harry said. He went upstairs to Dudley's second bedroom, where there was a bed, and he lay down on it, and he stared at the ceiling, and he felt the warmth in his chest like a compass needle, steady and pointing somewhere. Vernon did shout. That evening, when he came home and found the letter and Petunia's expression, he went quite spectacularly red and his voice climbed to the register that usually made Harry brace himself. But Harry sat at the kitchen table and let the shouting move around him like weather, and at no point did he flinch, and at no point did he argue, and at no point did the specific hollow fear that Vernon's shouting had always produced, that animal hindbrain response of small and contained and invisible, make any appearance at all. Vernon, in the middle of a particularly emphatic declaration about freaks and not in his house and absolutely not, stopped. Looked at Harry with eyes gone suddenly uncertain. And finished the sentence considerably quieter than he'd started it. "I'm going," Harry said, when Vernon had run down. "The letter explains how to get my school things. I'll need some money." There was a long silence. The kitchen clock ticked. Dudley, who had been eating biscuits in the doorway, was very quiet. "There's a savings account," Petunia said, not looking at anyone. "From when your parents, there's money from your parents' estate. It's been sitting. We never used it." A pause. "It was yours." Harry looked at her. She looked at the table. "Thank you," he said. He went to bed in Dudley's second room that night. It was his room, he decided, effective immediately, and he lay in the dark and thought about a school called Hogwarts and a world that had been there his whole life, waiting, and the warmth in his chest was bright and steady as a coal and he thought, with a clarity that felt like something returning to him after a long absence, "This is what I was always going to be." The 1st of August, Harry Potter went to London. Not with the Dursleys. Not with a guide or a guardian. Alone, because no one had offered to come and he hadn't needed to ask. He took the train, which he had figured out from a map in the kitchen, and he walked from Paddington to the Leaky Cauldron on Charing Cross Road following the instructions in the letter, and the whole of London moved around him like a river and he moved through it with his hands in his pockets and his eyes open. The Leaky Cauldron appeared between a bookshop and a record store, and Harry looked at it and then went in. The barman was an old man with no hair and a lot of teeth. He looked at Harry and his eyes went to Harry's forehead and he dropped the glass he was polishing. "Bless my soul," he said. "Harry Potter." The pub went quiet. People turned. And Harry stood in the doorway with the London street noise at his back and the candlelight and the smell of old wood and something sweet smoking on a burner somewhere, and the warmth in his chest said yes, this is the right place, and he looked around at all the faces turning toward him and said, very calmly, "Hello. I need to get to Diagon Alley." He got a table. He got tea. He got, within about 4 minutes, approximately 9 people all talking at once. He handled them with a patience and a present, attentive courtesy that somehow, without any sharpness, without any performance, made it clear that he was happy to meet them but he was also here to do something specific. The people at his table, without quite understanding why, became helpful rather than adoring. They told him what he needed to know. Tom the barman led him into the courtyard and tapped the bricks and the wall opened, and Harry stood at the entrance to Diagon Alley and felt, for the first time in his life, something he would only identify much later as belonging. He got money from the bank. The goblin at his vault looked at him with orange eyes and no expression whatsoever, and Harry looked back with equal composure, and the transaction was conducted with mutual professional respect. He got his school things systematically and efficiently, working through the list. He got robes, cauldron, scales, telescope, potion ingredients. He got his books from Flourish and Blots, and while he was there he bought 3 extra books that weren't on the list, one about magical theory, one about the history of magical bloodlines in Britain, and one, somewhat at random, about wand lore. He got his wand last. Ollivander's shop was narrow and dusty and the boxes went all the way to the ceiling, and Mr. Ollivander himself appeared from between 2 shelves like a thought you'd forgotten you were having, pale and silver-eyed and looking at Harry with an intensity that was not threatening but was very thorough. "Mr. Potter," he said. "I wondered when I'd be seeing you." "Mr. Ollivander," Harry said. "Your father, Ash, 11 inches, pliable. Good for charms work. Your mother, Willow, 10 1/4, swishy. Excellent for, what would suit me?" Harry asked. "Not rude. Just direct." Ollivander looked at him for a moment. Then something shifted in his expression, not displeasure, something more like reassessment. "Let's find out," he said, and began pulling boxes. The first 6 wands did nothing or did something wrong. One singed the tip of Harry's finger, one sent a stream of ink across the floor, one produced a sound like a foghorn, and Ollivander had to confiscate it quickly. But on the 7th, when Ollivander put the holly wand in Harry's hand with something like reluctance, saying, "Curious, curious, 11 inches, holly, phoenix feather," the warmth in Harry's chest didn't just flare, it leapt. It leapt and then sang, the way a tuning fork sings when you hold it near a matching note, and gold sparks showered from the wand tip in long arcs that curled in the dusty air like calligraphy. But they didn't fade the way sparks usually faded. They hung there for a full 3 seconds, coiling. And in the coil of them, just for a moment, Harry thought he saw a shape, a feather, or a wing, or possibly a woman's face, silver-eyed and distant. Then they were gone. Ollivander stood very still. "Curious," he said again, but this time the word had different weight. He looked at Harry, at his forehead first, then at his eyes, then at the wand still warm in his hand. "Mr. Potter, may I ask you something?" "Yes." "Have you been experiencing anything unusual recently? Beyond the usual unusual, I should say, for someone in your position." Harry considered him. Decided he was trustworthy. "There's a warmth," he said. "In my chest. Started about a year ago. And sometimes gold light." Ollivander was quiet for long enough that Harry counted 11 seconds. "I see," he said at last. "Well." He seemed to decide something. "That wand will serve you very well, Mr. Potter. Better than you may yet understand. And when you encounter," he stopped. Shook his head. 7 galleons, if you please." "What were you going to say?" Ollivander smiled, and it was a strange smile, neither warm nor cold, the smile of someone who has seen too many things to be entirely comfortable but has made peace with the discomfort. "I was going to say, when you encounter whatever it is your magic is reaching toward, trust it. It knows the way better than your mind does." A pause. "Your mind is excellent, Mr. Potter, I can see that. But the blood knows things the mind is still catching up to." Harry paid for his wand and walked back out into Diagon Alley with the warmth in his chest singing quietly along to Nothing and Everything. September 1st came in off the back of a cool morning, the summer cashing out early. Platform 9 3/4 smelled like steam and families and the particular electric anticipation of several hundred children about to be transported to a school where they could do things that bent the rules of reality. Harry arrived at King's Cross alone, his trunk on a trolley, his owl in her cage, He'd bought a snowy owl at the magical menagerie 3 weeks ago and named her Hedwig, after a name he'd found in one of his books, and he stood in front of the barrier between platforms 9 and 10 and thought about it for approximately 4 seconds and walked through. The train was red and enormous and beautiful, and Harry stood on the platform and looked at it and felt the warmth in his chest ripple outward, the way a stone thrown in water makes rings that keep expanding long after the stone has sunk. He found a compartment near the back, stowed his trunk, sat Hedwig's cage on the rack above, and opened the book about magical bloodlines he'd bought in Flourish and Blots. He'd been reading it in pieces since August, and he was on the chapter about Veela. He read for 10 minutes before the compartment door opened and a round-faced boy with very large ears put his head in and said, "Sorry, is it all right if everywhere else is full?" It wasn't full. It was the 1st of September and half the compartments were empty. Harry looked up at the boy and understood immediately that this was a lie told by someone who wanted company and wasn't sure he was allowed to ask for it. "Sit down," Harry said. "What's your name?" "Ron," the boy said, coming in and dumping himself in the seat across. "Ron Weasley." He eyed the book. "Is that a good one?" "Interesting," Harry said. "There's a section on Veela. Did you know the bonding ceremonies in Veela bloodlines can last up to 3 months? And if the bond is the choosing kind, there are only 3 kinds. This is rare, the chosen person's magic. I have no idea what Veela are," Ron said cheerfully. Harry looked at him. "How do you not know what Veela are?" "Weren't you raised? I know what they are, I just don't know the technical. My brothers never mentioned bond types." Ron leaned over to look at the page. "Blimey, she's drawn, isn't she?" He pointed at the illustration, which was a silver-haired woman whose expression was serene and somewhat terrifying. "We've got Fred and George and Percy and Bill and Charlie and Mum will have had me doing garden gnomes all summer, so no, I've not read the textbooks yet." He sat back. "Are you Harry Potter?" "Yes." "Oh." Ron blinked. "Right. I won't make a thing of it." "Thank you," Harry said sincerely. They talked for the rest of the train ride. Ron ate most of the food from the trolley. Harry bought everything on it, something he had decided to do before he'd even left Privet Drive, on the basis that money was a thing he had now and food from a trolley on a magical train was exactly what it should be spent on. And Ron told Harry about his brothers in Hogwarts and Quidditch and the house system and all the things Harry had been gathering from books but which were, Ron explained, different from lived experience. At one point the compartment door slid open and a girl with very bushy brown hair and an air of extreme purposefulness looked at them both and said, "Have either of you seen a toad?" "A boy named Neville's lost one." "No," Harry said. "But I could help look." "What kind of toad?" "The girl, Hermione Granger," she said, like she was reading her own name off a list, blinked. Like she had expected either disinterest or dismissal and had prepared for both and this was neither. "It's a common brown toad. He's been gone since, I'll help look," Harry said, closing his book and standing up. He looked at Ron. Ron sighed. "Fine. I'll help look." They found Neville's toad in the luggage rack 4 compartments down. Neville was a quiet, soft-eyed boy who seemed surprised to exist, and he clutched the toad with an expression of profound relief and said, "I keep losing him. He doesn't like me, I think." "He seems fine," Harry said. The toad was sitting in Neville's cupped hands looking as content as a toad can look. "What's his name?" "Trevor." Neville said it with resignation. "Solid name," Ron said. They were all, somehow, in the same compartment for the last hour of the journey, and when the train pulled into Hogsmeade Station and the torchlight and the voice of a very large man calling for first years floated in through the windows, Harry closed his book on Veela bloodlines and stood up and felt the warmth in his chest move in response, not to the train or the station or the cold September air, but to something distant and directional, like a current in water, pulling northeast. He filed that away. He would think about it later. He followed Hagrid. The very large man's name was Hagrid, apparently, with the other first years across the Black Lake in the small boats, and Hogwarts rose out of the darkness and Harry looked up at it and felt nothing sentimental and nothing afraid. He felt, instead, a clean, bright recognition. He had been here before, or something in him had been. The great hall was enormous and loud and candlelit and full of students watching the first years file in, and Harry walked down the center of it between the long tables and kept his eyes forward and his shoulders level and let the stares wash over him without purchase. The Sorting Hat's song was informative. The hat went on various heads. Hermione was sorted into Gryffindor with an expression of vindicated satisfaction. Neville was sorted into Gryffindor after a long pause that seemed to surprise Neville considerably. Ron was sorted into Gryffindor immediately. Potter, Harry. The hall went very quiet. People craned their necks. Harry walked up, sat on the stool, and the hat came down over his eyes. In the dark under the brim, a voice said, "Well, well. I haven't felt anything like this in a very long time." "I get that a lot," Harry said. "No you don't. You've spent 10 years in a cupboard." The hat wasn't unkind about it. Just precise. "But that's the point, isn't it? You were being managed. Something stopped cooperating with that." "Something started, actually," Harry said. "About a year ago." "Yes. I can feel it. It's not Hogwarts magic and it's not quite what I'd call traditional." A pause. "You're going to be interesting, Mr. Potter. Potentially disruptive. Not in the way I usually worry about, not darkness or ambition without restraint. Different." Another pause, longer. "Brave enough for Gryffindor, obviously. Clever enough for Ravenclaw. Loyal enough for Hufflepuff. And there's something in you that understands power, not in the Slytherin way, not ambition for its own sake, but, you understand what it means to have power that others try to take from you. That's different from wanting power over others." "Where do I go?" Harry asked. "Where do you want to go?" "Somewhere with good people in it." The hat made a sound that might have been laughter. "Every house has good people in it, child. Somewhere with people who'll stand beside me rather than try to arrange me." "Ah," the hat said. "That narrows it considerably." A pause. "Gryffindor." The Gryffindor table erupted. Harry took the hat off, handed it back to Professor McGonagall, who was looking at him with an expression of assessing interest, and walked to the Gryffindor table where Ron was making space and Hermione was clapping enthusiastically and Neville was smiling the careful smile of someone who is still not quite sure what is happening but is glad to be part of it. He sat down. The feast appeared. Harry helped himself to roast chicken and thought about what the hat had said, not in the way I usually worry about, and ate his dinner. Across the table, a prefect was telling them about Professor Quirrell, the defense teacher, who was sitting at the high table in a purple turban and looked, Harry thought, distinctly unwell. Like a man who hadn't been sleeping. Or hadn't been alone for a very long time. During the pudding course, Quirrell walked behind the Gryffindor table with his goblet in hand, moving toward the faculty seating arrangement, and he paused behind Harry, just for a second, just the briefest hesitation, the way you hesitate before touching something you suspect is hot, and then he moved on faster than he'd paused, and the back of Harry's neck went cold. Not the cold of fear. The cold of proximity to something wrong. The warmth in his chest flared sharp and brief, like a warning flare, and Harry watched Quirrell sit down at the high table and watched the turban and thought, that is a problem I will need to understand. He didn't mention it to anyone at the table. He ate his treacle tart. He answered questions from the older students about the scar on his forehead with the same patient, unperformative calm he'd deployed all day. But he watched Quirrell for the rest of the feast, and what he noticed was this: Quirrell did not look at Harry directly. Not once. He looked near Harry, around Harry, at everything adjacent to Harry, with the careful deliberation of someone trying very hard not to look at a source of heat. Whatever was in that turban, and Harry had read enough of the Bloodlines book to know that the warmth in his chest was not arbitrary, that it was responding to something, whatever it was, it did not want to look at Harry Potter directly. Harry found that very interesting. He went to bed in the dormitory that night in a four-poster bed with curtains the color of dried blood and a view of the grounds through a window, and the warmth in his chest was steady and bright and directional, and somewhere out over the northern French coast a 12-year-old girl with silver eyes and incandescent hair was standing at her dormitory window at Beauxbatons and feeling the thread go taut between them like a plucked string, and she put her hand to her collarbone and said, very quietly, to no one in particular, bientôt. Soon. Harry didn't hear it. But he felt it, the pulse of it, distant and warm, arriving in his chest like the echo of a bell struck somewhere far away. He closed his eyes. Outside, the Scottish sky was full of stars. Chapter 2. The year things started breaking. The first week of classes at Hogwarts established several things about Harry Potter that the rest of Gryffindor would spend the year quietly processing. The first was that he paid attention. Not the performed attention of a student trying to impress, not Hermione's hand shooting up before the question was finished, but a still, complete, watchful attention that meant he missed nothing. Professor McGonagall transfigured her desk into a pig and back again on the first day, and Harry watched it with the focused interest of someone dismantling a mechanism to understand how it worked. When she handed out matches to be turned into needles, Harry had a needle within 4 minutes. It wasn't perfect, slightly thick at the eye, but it gleamed and it was sharp, and McGonagall looked at it for a moment and said, "Good. Refine the tip." She moved on without making a performance of it, which Harry appreciated. He refined the tip. The second thing was that he had opinions. Not aggressive ones, not ones delivered with the edge of someone who needed to win, but genuine positions that he'd thought through and held without apology. In History of Magic, when Professor Binns droned through the goblin rebellions of the 17th century in a voice like water running over gravel, Harry asked a question about goblin motivations that made Binns stop mid-sentence and look at the class with the mild surprise of a man who had genuinely forgotten that students were capable of engagement, and said, "Yes, well, the economic dimension is, documented in." Yes, and then answered it properly, which was the most animated anyone in the class had seen Binns in living memory. The third thing, the one the other first years noticed but didn't discuss directly, not yet, was that Harry was not afraid of the castle. This sounds like a small thing. It wasn't. Hogwarts was enormous and shifting and full of staircases that moved and portraits that commented on you as you passed and ghosts that appeared through walls at unpredictable moments. Nearly headless Nick startled half their year into minor screaming on the second day by coming through the dormitory wall while they were getting dressed, and Neville sat down hard on the floor and Ron knocked over a lamp. Harry looked at the ghost and said, "Morning. You're nearly headless, Nick, aren't you? I read about you." Nick was so delighted by being recognized rather than screamed at that he floated alongside Harry all the way to breakfast and told him about the history of the fourth-floor corridor in more detail than Harry strictly needed. By Friday, Nick had taken to materializing specifically near Harry and recommending staircases. He noticed things about Hogwarts that the other first years were too busy being overwhelmed to notice. He noticed that the warmth in his chest responded to the castle differently than it responded to people. It quieted here, settled, like it recognized the ancient magic in the stones as something adjacent to itself without being the same kind of thing. He noticed that the corridor on the third floor, the one Dumbledore had mentioned explicitly as off-limits, made the warmth go flat and guarded the way it had done with Quirrell at the feast. He filed that under soon and didn't go up to the third floor. He also noticed that Peeves the poltergeist left him alone. Not after a confrontation, not after Harry said anything to him, just, from the first time Peeves caught sight of Harry in the entrance hall and swooped down grinning with a water balloon, the poltergeist had pulled up short 10 feet above Harry's head, looked down at him with genuine uncertainty, and then veered away making a sound that was almost a grumble. Ron, who had been braced for impact, watched Peeves disappear around a corner and said, "That's never happened to anyone in my entire family." "He seemed confused," Harry said. "He's Peeves. He's not supposed to get confused. He's supposed to get me wet." "Maybe another time," Harry offered. "Cheers," Ron said flatly. The flying lesson was on Thursday of the second week, and it was the first time Harry had been on a broomstick, and it was also, essentially, a disaster for everyone except Harry and, arguably, for the broomstick itself, which seemed to enjoy the experience. Madam Hooch lined them up on the lawn with school brooms that were old and splinter-prone and told them to put their dominant hand over the broom and say up with authority. Half the class got nothing. Neville's broom shot upward and cracked him across the chin. Hermione's rose to about hip height and then slowly tipped sideways. Harry sat up and his broom was in his hand in the same moment the word left his mouth, and the warmth in his chest moved outward into the wood of it and the broom shivered like a living thing settling itself. Said Madam Hooch, looking at Harry's broom with the expression of someone who has taught flying for 30 years and not often seen that. Good. Hold it still. Mounting and hovering was the lesson. They were explicitly told not to fly. Neville, panicked by his broom drifting upward, grabbed it wrong and shot straight up, rolled, and fell off at 20 feet. Madam Hooch took him to the hospital wing. Everyone else stood on the ground holding their brooms and waiting. Draco Malfoy picked up Neville's remembrall from the grass. He looked at it and then at the assembled first-years and said, with the particular confidence of a boy who had grown up in rooms where his opinion was the last word, "Well, I think I'll leave this up here somewhere for Longbottom to find." He kicked off and rose maybe 15 feet, holding the remembrall up. Harry looked at him for a moment. "Put it down, Malfoy." Malfoy looked at him. The entire class looked at Harry. There was the specific silence of people waiting to see what happens when two forces meet. "Or what?" Malfoy said. "Or I'll come up there and take it," Harry said. He wasn't angry. His voice was level. He mounted his broom, and the broom went completely still under him like it was paying attention, and he kicked off. He'd never been on a broom before in his life, and the first thing he noticed was that it was nothing like anything else. It was not like climbing. It was not like running. It was like the ground had agreed to let go of him specifically, and he rose to 15 feet and the wind hit him and every single cell of his body said yes, this, exactly this. He looked at Malfoy and held out his hand. The thing about Malfoy was that he was used to people being intimidated. He was used to the weight his name carried, the way it made teachers pause and students step back. What he was not used to was someone who clearly was not intimidated, who was simply waiting, and whose complete absence of aggression was somehow more pressuring than aggression would have been. Malfoy threw the remembrall. Not gently, sideways, deliberately high and to Harry's left, the throw of someone trying to make him look foolish. Harry caught it without looking at it, with his left hand, at full extension, and the catch was so clean and so effortless that it produced an audible sound from the students below, a collective intake of breath. He came back down. Landed clean. Handed the remembrall to Ron. "That's Neville's," he said. Ron took it with an expression of barely contained awe. "Yeah," he managed. Later, McGonagall materialized out of nowhere in a way that suggested she had been watching from the castle, and took Harry aside, and he spent the next 10 minutes being told by the deputy headmistress, in the suppressed but unmistakable tone of someone who is deeply pleased and trying not to show it, that she had spoken to the Gryffindor Quidditch captain and he was going to be their new seeker. She mentioned that first-years didn't usually get on the team as she handed him the letter of recommendation, and she said it in exactly the way someone mentions a rule they've decided doesn't apply. Harry said, "Thank you, Professor," and went back to dinner, and Ron Weasley spent the next 2 hours asking increasingly detailed Quidditch questions until Harry finally said, "I'll need to learn all of this properly if I'm going to play," and Ron said, "I'll teach you everything," with the enthusiasm of someone who has found his purpose. The broomstick incident with Malfoy led, roughly 1 week later, to the corridor confrontation that led, in turn, to the first real test of what the warmth in Harry's chest actually did to a person. Malfoy challenged Harry to a duel at midnight. Specifically a duel in the trophy room, which Harry recognized immediately as a trap. Either Filch was being tipped off, or Malfoy intended to show up with friends and not wands, or both. Harry knew it was a trap with the calm certainty he felt about most things now, and he told Ron this while they were supposed to be doing Charm's homework. "So don't go," Ron said. "I'm going," Harry said. Ron looked at him. "You just said it was a trap." "It is. But Malfoy will use it against me if I don't show. He'll tell everyone I was afraid." Harry uncapped his ink. "So I'm going, and whatever the trap is, we'll handle it." Ron was quiet for a moment. If you want to come." Ron thought about it for approximately 3 seconds. "Okay," he said. "But for the record, I think it might be," Harry agreed. "Come anyway." They went at midnight, slipping out under Harry's invisibility cloak, which he had not told anyone about and which Ron's eyes went wide at and which Harry said, very calmly, had been his father's and had arrived in an unmarked package on Halloween and which he'd been expecting to find a use for. They went to the trophy room and Malfoy wasn't there. Filch was, sniffing around the corridor outside, and they'd nearly been caught when Hermione Granger appeared from a different direction in a state of furious whispered desperation saying she'd followed them to tell them it was a trap, which Harry had already told Ron, and that she was very disappointed in both of them, which Harry accepted without particular distress. They ended up on the forbidden corridor. The 3rd floor. The door at the end. Harry opened it, because he needed to know, and behind the door was a dog the size of a small vehicle with 3 heads, and the 3 heads all looked at them simultaneously with the specific attention of predators who have identified a meal. Harry stood in the doorway and looked at the dog and the dog looked at Harry and the warmth in his chest did the thing it did with the castle, that recognition of ancient magic, that quiet. The 3-headed dog's ears went back. Not aggressively. Like a dog that has caught a scent it doesn't understand. "There's a trapdoor," Harry said. "Under its paw." Ron made a small sound. Hermione said, "How do you, the right paw? It's standing on something." Harry stepped back and pulled the door closed. "We need to go." They went. They didn't get caught. In the common room afterward, with the fire dying in the grate and the 3 of them sitting on the hearthrug in various states of adrenaline-induced silence, Hermione said, "You knew there was a trapdoor. How did you know?" "I didn't," Harry said. "I felt it. The magic under it." He looked at her. "Whatever's down there, it's important. Something's being kept there. And someone at this school wants to get to it." Hermione looked at him with the expression she used when she was recalibrating, when new information was arriving faster than her frameworks could process it. "You felt the magic?" "Yes." She opened her mouth. Closed it. "You can't just feel magic. That's not how any of this works." "I know," Harry said. "And yet." She looked at Ron. Ron shrugged, with the helpless expression of someone who had spent 6 weeks watching Harry be inexplicable and had made his peace with it. He caught that remembrall, Hermione. Without looking. Hermione looked back at Harry. She was, he thought, a very intelligent person who was currently experiencing the discomfort of encountering a thing that didn't fit her categories. He didn't push her. He let her sit with it. "Fine," she said at last. "Fine. But we're not going back to that corridor." "Not yet," Harry said. Her eyes narrowed. "What does not yet mean?" "It means," Harry said, standing up and stretching, "that I want to understand what's down there before I decide what to do about it." He looked at her. "I'm not going to do anything reckless. Going to the 3rd floor corridor at midnight was reckless. That was information gathering." He headed for the boys' staircase. "Night, Hermione." She made a sound of exasperation behind him that he heard all the way up the stairs. In November, the troll happened. Harry had already noticed that Halloween felt wrong before Quirrell burst into the Great Hall screaming about a troll in the dungeons and fainted with theatrical completeness into a bowl of caramelized parsnips. Harry noticed it the way he noticed Quirrell at every opportunity, with focused attention, cataloguing the wrongness, the way Quirrell's voice had a faint echo to it that wasn't architectural, the way the man's hand sometimes went to his turban in a reflexive, almost protective gesture. When the troll got into the castle and Hermione was in the girls' bathroom and they went to find her, Harry and Ron, because they'd overheard Professor Quirrell mention the dungeon and realized the troll wasn't going to the dungeon at all, Harry moved through the corridors with the direct purposefulness of someone who had done this before, which he hadn't. But the warmth in his chest was a compass and the compass said that way and Harry followed it. The troll was 12 feet tall and smelled like old boots and the inside of a drain, and it was in the bathroom with Hermione who was pressed against the wall with her wand out and her face the color of chalk. Harry came through the door and the troll swung its club at him and Harry was not where the club expected him to be, which was something that had been happening with increasing frequency, his body moving slightly ahead of his conscious decision to move, the warmth doing something that felt like it was adjusting for him, giving him half a second that other people didn't have. He grabbed a pipe on the wall and swung himself up onto the troll's shoulders and when the troll reached for him he shoved his wand into the troll's nostril and said the only spell he could think of that was appropriate, which was Alohomora, which opened locks, and which opened the inside of the troll's head to a degree that made the troll sit down abruptly and then very slowly fall sideways. It was not elegant. Ron pointed this out afterward. "I know," Harry said. "Alohomora," Ron said again, not for the first time. "It worked. It worked weird. In my defense, I was on its shoulders." Hermione, who had sat down against the wall and was still somewhat pale, said, "You swung on a pipe." "Yes. In your school robes." "Also yes." There was a pause. Then Hermione said, "Thank you," and she said it with a directness and a lack of qualification that was so unlike her usual manner of doing things that both Harry and Ron looked at her with slightly startled expressions. She looked back at them steadily. "Both of you. Thank you." "Friends then?" Ron said. "Friends," she said. Like she'd decided. It was somewhere in the aftermath of this, with McGonagall arrived and points being awarded and the teachers filing out, that something happened that Harry would think about for a long time. In the chaos of adults arriving and Hermione taking the blame with magnificent composure, someone brushed against Harry, one of the older Gryffindors who'd come to see what the noise was about, a fifth-year girl named Penelope Clearwater who had been trying to accio the teacher's attention from the corridor. She grabbed Harry's shoulder in passing, not aggressively, just the way you grab someone's shoulder in a crowd, and she was holding her wand, and the tip of her wand caught Harry's sleeve. Nothing visible happened. Nothing dramatic. But Penelope Clearwater went still for just a second, like a clock that had skipped a tick, and when she started moving again her wand hand was uncertain, the next spell she tried coming out half-strength, the sparks pale and thin where they should have been bright. Harry saw it. He wasn't sure she felt it. He wasn't sure anyone else noticed. But he noticed, and he turned it over in his mind on the way back to Gryffindor Tower and he thought, something is protecting me, and it's not patient about it. December brought the Mirror of Ariste, and Harry would never quite forgive himself for how long he went back. He found it by accident, through a door that turned out to lead to an abandoned classroom, one night with the invisibility cloak when he'd been tracing the third-floor corridor from the outside, mapping approaches. The mirror was tall and gold-framed and the inscription along the top read Ariste stra eru oit ube kafru oit on wosi and Harry stood in front of it and saw himself surrounded by people. He recognized his parents. Lily and James Potter, both young, both alive, his mother with her red hair and his father with his glasses and his terrible hair, and around them a crowd of people he didn't know who must be family and they were all looking at him like he was the most important thing in any room he'd ever enter. He went back 3 nights in a row. On the 4th night he found Dumbledore sitting in the corner of the room in an armchair that hadn't been there before, apparently doing nothing in particular, in the way of someone who has been waiting for a while without minding. "Harry," Dumbledore said. "Professor." A pause. "Do you know what this mirror shows?" "The deepest desire of whoever stands before it," Harry said. He looked at the mirror. Looked back at Dumbledore. "I've been coming back too often." "Yes. No judgment in it. Just acknowledgement. I know it's not real. The people in it. Harry looked at the mirror again, at his parents' faces. But I keep thinking if I look long enough he stopped. Shook his head. I know better. That's the problem. I know better and I keep coming anyway. Dumbledore regarded him over the half-moon spectacles. Harry had been thinking about Dumbledore since September, thinking about him in the specific, careful way he thought about things that were important and complicated. He had an impression of the headmaster that was warm and layered and also, underneath, wary. Not of the man's power. Of the man's certainty. Of the specific way Dumbledore looked at Harry sometimes, like he was looking at a piece of a plan rather than a person. What do you see? Harry asked, gesturing at the mirror. Dumbledore smiled slightly. That's a private business. Yes, Harry said. It is. A beat. Mine too, then. Dumbledore looked at him. Something shifted in those blue eyes, a reassessment, slight but real. The mirror will be moved, he said. It's not safe to leave it here. I figured you'd say that, Harry said. Can I ask you something? Of course. The thing on the 3rd floor. Someone tried to steal it on Halloween, didn't they? Before the troll distraction. Harry watched Dumbledore's face. The troll was to get the teachers away from that corridor. I think whoever let the troll in wanted to get to the trapdoor while everyone was distracted. Silence. Very particular silence, the kind that is itself an answer. You're well informed, Dumbledore said, carefully. I pay attention, Harry said. He stood up. Put the invisibility cloak back over himself. Good night, Professor. Good night, Harry. And then, as Harry was almost at the door, you have more of your mother in you than people often notice, I think. Harry stopped. Without turning around, he said, she was clever. Very, Dumbledore said. And she did not like being managed. Harry thought about this. That's a warning, he said. It might be a compliment. It can be both, Harry said, and left. The Quidditch match in November had already happened by then, his first match, Gryffindor vs Slytherin, the Nimbus 2000 from McGonagall arriving on the first day of October and Ron spending approximately 4 days vibrating with excitement, and Harry had taken his position as seeker and the match had started and somewhere in the second half his broom had started trying to throw him. He knew immediately it was deliberate. The broom lurched and bucked, the kind of movement that was not wind and not instinct, it had the character of something interrupted, some outside will pressing in and finding purchase. The warmth in his chest went sharp and still, the way it did when something was directly wrong, and Harry gripped the broom with his legs and his hands and he thought, very clearly and precisely, this is magic being used against me by someone who knows what they're doing and someone is watching. Hagrid told him later. The whole thing told him, Hermione had set Snape on fire, because she'd looked through her binoculars and seen Snape muttering and unblinking at Harry's broom and drawn the right conclusion. It was not the right person, Harry had figured that out by watching Quirrell during the confusion, watching the professor's head snap sideways the moment Snape broke contact, but it was the right action, and Snape's counter-curse breaking had given Harry enough broomback to find the snitch and end the game. He'd put the snitch in his mouth because there was no time for anything else and that was not something he was going to discuss with anyone. The snitch was in his pocket now, sitting on the common room table next to his charms essay, and Ron had told the story about the swallowed snitch approximately 11 times in 2 days to different audiences. You could, Harry said, leave out the part where I ate it. I could, Ron agreed. But that would be leaving out the best bit. Hermione looked up from her essay. It really was impressive, she said, which was the most oblique compliment in her arsenal but she meant it genuinely. Thank you, Harry said. She looked back down. Made a small sound. Hermione. Your spells have been, Harry stopped. Chose his words. Have you noticed anything unusual? With your wand work? She looked up sharply. What do you mean? He'd been trying to figure out how to ask this for 2 weeks. He'd watched it carefully, the thing happening to Hermione's magic, noting when it happened and when it didn't, what triggered it and what didn't, tracing the pattern with the same systematic attention he brought to everything. He'd been to the library 3 times. He'd reread the chapter on Veela bonds in the Bloodlines book twice and found a footnote in the 3rd appendix that said, in very academic language, that involuntary magical binding or use of magic without a person's autonomous consent, when directed toward a bonds chosen, would begin to diminish the offending caster's power over time. He had not finished processing the implications of the word chosen. The Wingardium Leviosa you did on me, he said carefully. In the first week. You Leviosa'd my trunk without asking because I was struggling with it on the stairs. She frowned. You were going to drop it. You used magic on me without asking, he said. He wasn't accusing. He was explaining. And on Halloween, in the bathroom, you tried to cast a shield around me. I felt it, you aimed it at me rather than the troll, and it didn't work. I know, she said. I don't understand why. I've been practicing that shield charm. I can cast it on myself fine. On Ron fine. But when I aimed it at you, there's something protecting me, Harry said. From magic used against my interests without my consent. I don't know the full mechanics of it yet. I'm still figuring it out. He paused. But I think it's already affecting your magic. Slightly. I think the more it's triggered, the stronger the effect. Hermione was quiet. She was looking at him with an expression that was not fear, exactly, but was something adjacent to it, the specific unease of someone whose competence is their foundation and who has just been told that foundation has a crack in it. How, she said. How are you? Why would something like that exist? I don't know yet, Harry said. I'm going to find out. But I wanted you to know. Because you're my friend and I'd rather you know than not know. The fire cracked. The common room was mostly empty, late on a Sunday night, most people gone to bed. Hermione looked at him for a long time. Then she said, I don't like not understanding things. I know. And I don't like the idea that my trying to help you could. It's not personal, Harry said. It's not punishing you. It's just, he tried to find the right word. Old. It's very old magic. It doesn't know about intentions, I think. Just actions. She absorbed this. Nodded once, sharp and decisive, the way she nodded when she'd accepted a premise and was moving on to work out its implications. I'll be more careful, she said. About consent. About asking. That's all I wanted, Harry said. She went back to her essay. Harry went back to his. Ron, who had pretended to be asleep through the entire conversation in the way that was entirely unconvincing but was Ron's particular way of giving them privacy, made a very loud point of waking up and saying, So, Quidditch practice tomorrow, Harry, are we? Bed, Ron, Harry said. Going, Ron said, getting up. He caught Harry's eye on his way to the stairs, and what he communicated in that half-second glance was something like, that was the right thing to do, telling her, and Harry nodded almost imperceptibly, and that was that. Christmas at Hogwarts was cold and quiet and the happiest Harry had been in 10 years of living. Ron stayed, because 6 Weasleys at home was sufficient and Ron wanted Harry to have company, and they had the dormitory to themselves for 2 weeks and played exploding snap and chess and ate every item in the Christmas crackers and Harry beat Ron at chess exactly once, which Ron examined from every angle afterward like a jeweler looking at a suspicious gem. The invisibility cloak got him the book. He'd been looking for it since October, Magical Bloodlines of Continental Europe, 3rd edition, the specific one that had the full account, not the footnote. It was in a restricted section and he'd gotten Quirrell to sign a permission slip by the simple expedient of asking politely and clearly and watching Quirrell's avoidance of his gaze give way, reluctantly, to compliance. He read it on Christmas evening while the common room fire crackled and Ron slept in the armchair across from him, and he found the full account and he read it twice and then he sat very still and looked at the fire for a while. The Veela choosing. Last recorded in 1743, in a bloodline from the south of France. The bond was not compulsion. The book was emphatic about this, absolutely not compulsive on either party. This was a corruption of the record. What it was, recognition. A marking. An ancient magical agreement between the Veela blood and a specific magical signature, a compatibility recognition that the blood made without consulting the mind. What it meant, the chosen person's magic became, in a sense, sovereign. Inviolable without consent. Any attempt to use magic on the chosen against their will or without their knowledge engaged a protective counterforce that was, the book noted with what seemed like academic understatement, functionally irreversible in its cumulative effects. There was a girl somewhere in France, Harry thought. And she had no more chosen this than he had chosen the cupboard under the stairs, and they were both caught in something ancient and decided. He closed the book. He looked at the fire. Then he did what he always did with complicated things, he put it in the part of his mind where he kept things that were important and unresolved, and he let it sit there, and he told himself he would understand more when he knew more and pushing before then was just noise. What he permitted himself to think was this: somewhere, in France, there was a person who was apparently connected to him in a way that had already changed his life twice over. And she had not asked for this any more than he had. And the first thing he would do, when they finally met, was make absolutely certain she understood that. Outside, snow fell on the Hogwarts grounds, thick and silent, covering the footpaths and the edge of the forbidden forest and the lake that was not quite frozen yet. Harry watched it for a while through the window and felt the warmth in his chest, patient and steady, and 3 countries away, at a Beauxbatons Christmas dinner that was considerably more elaborate than treacle tart and exploding snap crackers, a 13-year-old girl with silver eyes and white blonde hair touched her collarbone briefly and turned, for just a moment, toward England. The end of first year found Harry in the mirror chamber under the 3rd floor, having descended through the logic puzzle and the devil's snare and the broom challenge and the chess and all of it, having split from Ron at the chess and from Hermione at the potions, having said goodbye to both of them with the particular cleanness of someone who knows they're going somewhere alone and has decided to do it without drama. The thing in the back of Quirrell's head had a conversation with Harry that went about as well as a conversation with something that had murdered his parents could go, which is to say, badly for Quirrell. Harry touched him, Quirrell, trying to strangle him, grabbed his face, and what the warmth in Harry's chest did when Quirrell's hands made contact with his skin was not a warning flare. It was a detonation. The gold light was visible this time, physical and real, filling the mirror chamber from floor to ceiling, and everywhere that Quirrell's hands touched Harry's skin, Quirrell's hands burned. Not fire. Something older than fire. Something that the fragment of Voldemort in the back of Quirrell's head recognized and recoiled from so violently that it tore away from Quirrell in fleeing it, and the gap that left behind was unsurvivable. Harry woke up in the hospital wing 3 days later to Dumbledore sitting in the chair next to his bed, and the first thing he said was, "Quirrell's dead." "Yes," Dumbledore said. "The stone?" "Destroyed." Harry absorbed this. Nodded. Looked at Dumbledore. "You knew I'd go down there." A pause. "I hoped you might handle it." "That's not the same as telling me." "No," Dumbledore said. "It isn't." He looked at Harry over his glasses with that particular expression, the one that was warm and calculating simultaneously, the one that Harry filed under complicated. "Harry, there are some things. I'd like to read the chapter in Magical Bloodlines of Continental Europe about the Veela choosing bond," Harry said. "The complete primary source account. Do you have a copy in your office?" Dumbledore went very still. "I've read the secondary account," Harry said. "I'd like the primary." A long silence. In the hospital wing, somewhere down the ward, a patient sneezed. Sunlight came through the high windows in long gold bars. "Yes," Dumbledore said at last, quietly. "I believe I do." "Good," Harry said. He settled back against the pillow. "Also, I'd like a proper room next year. I know how things usually work at Hogwarts. But I'd like, for the record, my own room, if there's one available, because I don't sleep well in shared spaces. A pause. I slept in a cupboard for 10 years. I'd appreciate a door I can lock. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. He looked like a man who is trying to remember the shape of a plan he had drawn up and finding that several key features have moved. I'll see what can be arranged, he said. Thank you, Harry said. He closed his eyes. And thank you for the invisibility cloak. Another pause. How long have you known it was from me? Since October, Harry said. The handwriting on the note was disguised, but the parchment is particular. The same kind you use in your office. I noticed when McGonagall showed me the detention roster and I recognized the quality. He heard Dumbledore make a small, soft sound that might have been a laugh. Get some sleep, Harry, Dumbledore said. Already ahead of you, Harry said. He slept. Outside the hospital wing windows, the grounds were green with late spring, and the Hogwarts year wound down toward its end, and in the warmth of his chest something was patient and waiting and already measuring the distance to the other side of the channel. 3 years. He would wait 3 years. And when the time came, he would know her before she said her name. Chapter 3, The girl who already knew the summer before 4th year was the summer Harry stopped waiting. He had spent 3rd year being thorough. He'd learned what could be learned, gone through everything Lupin had to teach with the focused appetite of someone who had been hungry for a long time, had done the same with McGonagall and Flitwick and even Snape, picking up what was useful and filing the rest under later. He'd faced a boggart and a dementor and a full-grown werewolf and a man who'd spent 12 years in Azkaban and come through all of it essentially intact, which was not nothing. He'd grown 6 inches and his shoulders had filled out and his eyesight was exactly the same, but his glasses were better because he'd been to a proper optician in Diagon Alley rather than relying on Dudley's cast-offs with bent frames. He'd also spent 3rd year reading everything available on Veela bonds, which wasn't much. Most of the primary sources were in French and he'd started teaching himself French in 2nd year from a Muggle phrasebook and a French magical theory text he'd found in the restricted section, and by 3rd year he could read it well enough to get through academic French with a dictionary. He knew what the bond was. He knew what it wasn't. He'd made his peace with the fact that he could not undo it and spent his energy on understanding it instead, which was his preferred approach to most things. What he still didn't know was her name. He knew she was Veela, part Veela, and that the bond had activated when they were both roughly 10 and 12 respectively, which meant she was 2 years older. He knew she was French and that she attended Beauxbatons rather than Hogwarts. He knew, from the book and from Dumbledore's primary source account which he'd read 4 times and returned with annotations that made Dumbledore look at him with that complicated expression, that the bond was ancient and complete and that neither of them was under any obligation toward the other beyond the bond's protection, which operated regardless of their choices. He'd written the annotations in green ink because it was what he had on hand and for no other reason, and Dumbledore had read them and said nothing specific, but the look on his face said a great deal. The summer before 4th year, Harry was at Privet Drive for 6 weeks and then at the Burrow for the last 2 before term, and at the Burrow, around a long table with 7 Weasleys and food that kept appearing from the kitchen of its own accord, Arthur Weasley cleared his throat over dinner and said, "Have I mentioned the Triwizard Tournament?" The news about the tournament spread through Hogwarts on the first day back like fire in dry grass. By dinner the whole school knew, a tournament, 3 schools, 3 champions, 1 from each school, tasks of dangerous complexity, eternal glory. Ron was vibrating. Fred and George were already planning their age-defying scheme. Hermione was looking up the tournament in Hogwarts, a history before she'd finished her starter. Harry was thinking about which 3 schools. He already knew. He'd heard Arthur Weasley explain it at the Burrow. Hogwarts, Durmstrang, Beauxbatons. The warmth in his chest was doing something it had never done before. It wasn't the compass needle pull, the directional tug. It was more like an anticipation, the feeling of a held breath, something poised. He ate his dinner. He listened to the announcement from Dumbledore with the rest of the Great Hall. He watched Dumbledore explain about the age line and the goblet of fire with his usual combination of warmth and precision that was, Harry had come to understand, its own kind of misdirection. And when Dumbledore said the other schools will be arriving in late October, Harry set down his fork and looked at the ceiling of the Great Hall with its bewitched clouds and its floating candles and he thought, 2 months. He told Ron that evening. "Told you what?" Ron said. He was eating his 4th dinner roll and working through a chess problem. "There's someone coming with Beau's batons. Someone I need to meet." Ron looked up. He'd heard enough over 3 years to know when Harry was being precise about something. Someone like, a friend of a friend? Or someone like the 3rd floor corridor? "Neither," Harry said. "Someone I'm connected to." He paused. "You know the bond. The Veela bond one told you about in 1st year." Ron's chess piece fell over. He caught it. "The one that's been, the thing protecting you. The reason Hermione's," he stopped. Looked at Harry with sudden clarity. "The person it's from. She's at Beau's batons." "I think so." "Blimey," Ron said. He set down his roll and gave this his full attention, which meant he pushed the chess board aside entirely, which was serious for Ron. "Do you know who she is?" "No name. I know she's part Veela. I know she's 2 years older than me." He paused. "I know she's probably known this was coming for 2 years longer than I have." Ron thought about this. Is that weird?" "That she's known, I think it'll depend on her," Harry said. "On who she is. What if she's, difficult?" "Then she's difficult," Harry said, with complete equanimity. "That's separate from the bond. The bond's what it is. Who she is different." Ron looked at him for a long moment. "You've thought about this a lot." 3 years. "Right." Ron picked up his roll again. "Well. October, then." "October," Harry said. They came on the 28th. A powder blue carriage the size of a house, drawn by a dozen winged palomino horses that came in over the lake in the late October twilight and landed on the grounds with the carriage swaying gently behind them, and out of the carriage poured Beau's baton students in robes the same powder blue as the carriage, and the warm golden light of the entrance hall torches hit them and the hall went, predictably, somewhat stupid. Veela allure, Harry thought. Or partial Veela allure, diluted down through a generation or two, which was apparently still sufficient to make half the student body sigh collectively. He stood at the Gryffindor table and felt the warmth in his chest shift into something he'd never felt from it before. Not the warning note. Not the compass direction. Something that was almost like arrival. Like something that had been turning toward a point finally settling on it. He watched them file in. He was looking for, he didn't know exactly what. Silver eyes, the book had said. White blonde hair. He was looking for both. He found her. She was near the back of the Beau's baton students and she was tall and she moved through the hall with the ease of someone who had never once needed to decide whether she had the right to be in a room. She was extraordinarily beautiful in the objective, almost distancing way that some people are, the kind of beauty that operates at such a remove from ordinary that it circles back around to being interesting rather than overwhelming. Silver blonde hair to her waist. Silver eyes, exactly as described, currently moving across the Gryffindor table with the deliberate, measured pace of someone who is looking for something specific. Her eyes found his. She stopped walking. The girl behind her walked into her back and said something in French and moved around her, and she stood still in the middle of the filing Beau's baton students and looked at Harry across 20 feet of Great Hall with an expression that was not surprise. It was recognition, and something complicated behind it, not calculation, not relief exactly, but the specific expression of someone who has been carrying a certainty for a long time and has just had it confirmed. Harry looked back at her. She crossed the Great Hall toward him. Not the Beau's baton students' designated table. Directly at the Gryffindor table, directly at Harry, with 20 feet of floor between them and every eye in the vicinity following her because she was impossible not to look at, and she stopped in front of him with her chin level and her eyes very direct, and she said, in English that was precisely accented and entirely composed, "So. You are the one." "I'm going to need some context," Harry said. She looked at him for a moment. Then, and he had the impression this did not happen often, she almost smiled. It was barely there, a shift in the corner of her mouth, but it was genuine. "I think," she said, "that you know more context than you are letting on." "Probably true," Harry admitted. She looked at the space beside him. Ron was staring. Harry moved over 6 inches. She sat down, with the same ease she moved through the hall, next to Harry Potter at the Gryffindor table, while the Beauxbatons students watched from across the room and a very large proportion of Hogwarts tried to figure out what was happening. "Fleur Delacour," she said. "Harry Potter. I know who you are. Not unkind. Just factual. I have known since I was 12. I've known what you are since I was 11, Harry said. I didn't know your name. And now you do." She looked at him with that directness. Up close the silver of her eyes was not cold, it was bright, like water in sunlight, and it had intelligence in it that moved quickly. She was assessing him, Harry understood, the same way he was assessing her, and he got the impression that she was used to being the one who assessed and was not entirely certain what to do with someone assessing back. "You are not afraid of me," she said. "Should I be? Most people are." She said it without vanity, as a simple observation of fact. The allure. She looked at the rest of the Gryffindor table, where several people were staring at her in varying states of enchantment. "It is involuntary. I cannot turn it off. I can reduce it, but," she tilted her head. "You do not feel it." "I feel something," Harry said, carefully honest. "But it's not the allure. It's the other thing." She looked back at him. Something shifted in her expression, more private, more complicated. "The bond," she said quietly. "The bond," he agreed. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Around them the great hall was beginning to recover its usual noise, people going back to their dinners and conversations, the Beauxbatons students settling at their table while Durmstrang students filed in the other entrance with Victor Crumb at their front, and Ron suddenly forgot everything else in the room. "Did your grandmother explain it fully?" Harry asked. "Yes." A pause. "Did a book explain it to you?" "Mostly. And a primary source from Dumbledore's library." She raised an eyebrow. "You went to the headmaster for, I asked," Harry said. "He has it." Her expression settled into something that was thoughtful and, he thought, approving. "My grandmother said you would be either manageable or impossible," she said. "From the strength of the bond when it first activated." "Which does she think I am?" "She has not met you." A pause. "I think she was hoping manageable." "And you?" Fleur Delacour looked at Harry Potter with those silver eyes and said, without any particular inflection, "I think she is going to be disappointed." Harry said, "Probably fair." And the warmth in his chest said something that felt, if he was being honest with himself, very much like yes, exactly, this. The next 2 weeks established the shape of the thing between them, which was nothing like what anyone watching would have expected. They were not romantic, that was the first thing. They were not soft or swooning in each other's direction. What they were was this: 2 people who had been connected to each other by something neither of them chose, who were now engaged in the practical and genuinely interesting work of deciding who each other was. Fleur was sharp. That was the first thing Harry learned, and he learned it within the first hour. She did not traffic in softness as a default mode, and she did not moderate her opinions for other people's comfort, and she had no patience for pretense, which meant she and Harry had the same working mode, and this made conversation extremely efficient. She also had, underneath the composure, a temper that was very controlled and therefore very visible when it broke through, like something bright moving under ice. She was also funnier than anyone had led him to expect. Not performatively, she didn't make jokes, she made observations, dry and precise, with a timing that was impeccable, and then watched other people realize they were funny. Harry found this genuinely delightful. Ron, who had been nervous and tongue-tied in her vicinity for approximately the first 3 days and then got over it when she told him his chess strategy needed work and offered to play him, found it terrifying and was starting to enjoy it. Hermione's reaction was more complicated. Hermione had, over 3 years, developed a system with Harry. She was smart and she knew it, and Harry was smart and knew it too, and they'd found a working rhythm that was good for both of them. Hermione organized and systematized, and Harry made connections and followed instincts, and together they were a formidable research partnership. Hermione had also, over 3 years, been making steady progress at being aware of her tendency to manage, to cast spells without asking, to override choices she didn't agree with, to treat Harry's judgment as something to be corrected rather than respected. The progress was real. The habit was still there. When Fleur sat down at their library table on the second day and looked at Hermione's notes and said, "You have the Veela bond chapter of Arsenault's trait de liens magiques. Your translation is incorrect in the second paragraph. Irrevocable is not quite right, the original is au-delà de volonté, beyond will. There is no word for it in English." Hermione's pencil stopped moving. She looked at Fleur. Then at Harry. Then at Fleur again. "You've read Arsenault. My grandmother has the original." Fleur sat down, which she did without being invited because she operated on the assumption that she was welcome until informed otherwise. "I have read it since I was 12. It is about me, after all." Hermione looked at Harry. Harry was watching Hermione with the quiet, attentive expression that meant he was noting things. She looked back at her notes. "Beyond will," she repeated. "That's more absolute." "Yes," Fleur said. "So there's no way to negotiate with it, or modify." "No," Harry said gently. Hermione was quiet for a moment. "And my magic?" She didn't make it a question. "Is it worse?" Harry asked. She looked at her wand. "The Accio I tried this morning. It took 3 tries." A pause. "I don't like talking about this." "I know," Harry said. "It's not, I'm not blaming you." She said it precisely, like someone choosing each word. "I know the mechanism. I've accepted the mechanism. She stopped. "It's frightening," she said finally, and said it like it cost something, because for Hermione, admitting that her magic was frightening her was the equivalent of most people's complete emotional breakdown. "We'll figure it out," Harry said. "There may be nothing to figure out," Fleur said, not unkindly. "The bond does not undo itself. The bond's effects diminish if the cause diminishes," Harry said. He looked at Hermione. It's been weeks since you've done anything that triggered it. If you keep not triggering it, the existing effects should stabilize. Maybe improve." Fleur looked at him with interest. "The book says stabilize." "The book doesn't know everything about this specific bond," Harry said. "I've got different data." A pause. "What data?" Fleur asked. "Penelope Clearwater," Harry said. "First year." She grabbed my shoulder, wand contact. She wasn't directing anything at me specifically, just proximity. The effect was very minor. 2 months later it was gone. No repeat exposure. Fleur absorbed this. Made a small sound of consideration. "You've been tracking it?" "Since first year." She looked at him again with that assessment quality. "You are very strange," she said. Not an insult. A statement of fact delivered with what Harry was beginning to understand was, for Fleur, a form of approval. "So I'm told," Harry said. Hermione, who had been listening to this exchange with the expression of someone watching 2 people speak a language she almost understands, said quietly, "Thank you, Harry. For the data. She looked at her notes. Then, with visible effort, "And thank you for telling me. Both of you." Fleur looked at Hermione. Hermione looked at Fleur. There was a moment between them, two very clever people in the same orbit, taking stock. "Your French is academic," Fleur said. "Not conversational. But competent." "I taught myself," Hermione said. "I know. The grammar is technically correct, but the idioms are about 100 years out of fashion." She tilted her head. "I can help." Hermione blinked. Then, cautiously, "With French? And with Arsenault? I know the text better than you do. I have context you don't." She opened Hermione's notebook and uncapped a pen, Muggle, because she preferred them, she'd explained to Harry on day 2, and corrected the translation. "Your notes are otherwise excellent." Hermione looked at the correction. Looked at Fleur. Something in her expression shifted, the wariness easing back slightly. "Right," she said. "Well. Start from the beginning?" Harry went back to his own reading and let them get on with it, and the warmth in his chest was doing something that felt entirely separate from the bond and entirely its own, something that was just, simply, satisfaction. The champions were selected on the night of Halloween. The Goblet of Fire sent up the Beauxbatons champion first. Fleur caught the paper before it could flutter to the ground, and she walked forward while the hall applauded with that straight-backed composure she carried everywhere, and Harry watched her accept it without performance, without preening, without any of the showmanship that some of the others were already practicing. She looked like someone who had already known she was going to be chosen and had decided how she wanted to behave when it happened. Krum for Durmstrang. Cedric Diggory for Hogwarts, to great celebration. Then the fire went dark. Dumbledore pronounced the goblet spent. And then the goblet flared again, unexpected, a fourth tongue of flame, and a fourth piece of paper came out, and Dumbledore caught it, and read it, and his face did the thing it rarely did, it went still. "Harry Potter," he said. Harry sat at the Gryffindor table and did not move for a moment. The hall went completely quiet. He looked at the paper in Dumbledore's hand. Then he looked at Fleur, who had turned from the front of the hall and was looking back at him with an expression that had moved through surprise into something sharp and alert. He stood up. He walked to the front of the hall. He did not look at the floor, and he did not look apologetic, and he did not look afraid. He took the piece of paper from Dumbledore's hand and looked at it, Harry Potter, Hogwarts, and he thought about the fact that he was 14 and that someone had put his name in a contract he hadn't signed, and he was furious about it in the specific, cold, quiet way that he was furious about things. "I didn't put my name in," he said, to no one in particular and everyone in general. The silence held. "I know," Dumbledore said, and his voice was very careful. In the champion's antechamber, Karkaroff raged and Madame Maxime was very still, and the ministry official, Crouch, Sr., with the face of a man who had made difficult decisions for so long that difficulty had carved itself into his bones, said that the goblet constituted a binding magical contract and there was nothing to be done. Harry stood in the antechamber and let the argument move around him and thought about who had done this and why, and the warmth in his chest was doing the thing it did with Quirrell, that flat, guarded warning note, and it was not responding to anyone in the room. It was responding to the situation. To the fact that something had reached into the school and used it as a mechanism, the way someone in first year had used a troll as a distraction. After Karkaroff and Crouch and Madame Maxime left, Fleur remained. She had sent her chaperone ahead and she stood in the antechamber with Harry in a room that was suddenly just the two of them, and she looked at him and said, "You did not put your name in." "I said that." "I know. I believe you." She crossed her arms. "Someone wants you in this tournament." "Someone wants me dead in this tournament," Harry said. "There's a difference." She looked at him steadily. "You are not going to refuse it." "Can't. Binding contract." He looked at his hands. "And even if I could. Someone tried to kill me and they used the school to do it. I want to know who." "I thought you would say something like that." She was quiet for a moment. Then we do this together. Harry looked at her. You're a champion. Yes. We are competitors. We are also, she paused, looking for the right word. We are also connected. In a way that means if you die in this tournament, something in me dies with it. She said it without any drama, as a clinical fact. My grandmother was very clear on that point. The bond is not, it does not disappear if you do. It scars. Permanently. I'm not going to die in the tournament, Harry said. No, she said. You are not. Because I am going to make sure of it, and because you are apparently someone who also intends to make sure of it, and together that is more than enough. She looked at him with those silver eyes that were doing the thing where they assessed and calculated simultaneously. Tell me what the warmth in your chest is telling you right now. He blinked. You can feel it too. Not your warmth. Mine. It mirrors yours when you feel something strongly. She touched her collarbone. Tell me what yours says. He checked. He was honest about it, standing in the antechamber after midnight with the candles burning low and the smell of the great hall's feast still in the air. Danger, he said. Not from the tournament. From something in the castle. Something's been watching me since first year and it's involved in this. He paused. I thought Quirrell was the end of it in first year. It wasn't. She was very still. Voldemort, she said. She said it clearly, without the flinch most people produced at the name. Probably, Harry said. I can't prove it yet. Then we find the proof, she said, with the pragmatic simplicity of someone who has been briefed on a problem and is moving directly to solutions. Harry looked at her, this person who had arrived 2 weeks ago and sat down next to him in the great hall like she'd decided and had not once been anything other than exactly who she was, and he said, Fleur. The bond doesn't, I want to be clear. You don't owe me anything. She raised an eyebrow. I know that. I mean it. The bond's not I'm not going to hold you to anything because of, Harry, she said, and the way she said his name was different from how most people said it, not careful, not weighted with the scar and the story. Just his name. I am here because I chose to be here. Not the bond. Not obligation. She uncrossed her arms. I have known about this connection for 4 years. In that time I could have ignored it, avoided it, refused to come. I am at Hogwarts because Beauxbatons was invited to the tournament, yes, but I entered the tournament because I wanted to come here. Because I wanted to meet you. She paused. I wanted to see who you were. And, she said, you are not what I expected. You are better and more difficult and more interesting, and I think this year is going to be very complicated. She moved toward the door. I am glad to be here. She left. Harry stood in the empty antechamber for a moment and then put his hand flat on his chest and felt the warmth there, which was doing something he had no clean word for. Something that was not just the bond. Something that was making up its mind. He went to find Ron, who was going to be complicated about the tournament entry, but who was fundamentally Ron and would, Harry knew, come around. The first task was dragons. Harry learned this from Hagrid taking him to the edge of the forest at midnight and showing him, with the pride of someone who loves large dangerous things, for dragons in iron cages. Harry stood at the tree line and looked at the dragons and thought about what he was going to do about them with the same systematic calm he brought to problems that were trying to kill him. Fleur knew about the dragons too. She told him at breakfast the next morning, sitting beside him at the Gryffindor table with the ease of someone who has stopped registering other people's stares. Madame Maxime showed me, she said. Someone also told Crumb. Probably Karkaroff. She looked at her coffee. Cedric does not know. Harry was quiet for a moment. Then he got up, went to the Hufflepuff table, and told Cedric. Cedric looked at him with an expression of confusion that moved slowly through suspicion and came out the other side as straightforward gratitude. Why? He said. Because it's fair, Harry said. He went back to his table. Fleur looked at him. He picked up his toast. Don't, he said. I was not going to say anything. You were going to look meaningful. I am always looking meaningful. She picked up her coffee. What is your plan? Broom, Harry said. Get past the dragon fast and get the egg. You are very good on a broom, she said. Not a compliment in the self-conscious sense, she said it the same way she said everything, as a factual observation. I am going to use a charm to partially transfigure it. Distract the face. That's good. I know, she said. They worked like this in the days before the first task, comparing strategies, not coordinating them, because they were still competitors in a tournament that required individual performance, but there was a difference between competing and working against each other, and neither of them was interested in the latter. Hermione had her own preparation with Harry in the library, locating every spell that might help with large fire-breathing reptiles, and her magic was steady and functional and she did not, Harry noted, cast anything at him, having become very precise in the past month about aim and consent and asking. The night before the first task, Harry was in the common room alone, most of Gryffindor already in bed, and he was doing something he didn't generally admit to. He was not nervous, exactly, but he was running the problem again, looking for the things he'd missed. He did this before any significant event. It was how he thought. The portrait swung open and Fleur came through it, which was unexpected because the common room was not accessible to non-Gryffindors without a password, and Harry looked at her and said, "How did you get the password?" "The fat lady likes me," Fleur said, in the tone of someone who has long since accepted that this is simply a fact of her existence. She came and sat in the armchair across from him. She was in regular clothes, not her robes, and her hair was loose and she looked, Harry thought, considerably less like a tournament champion and considerably more like a 17-year-old person who was also running the problem. "Are you nervous?" he asked. "No," she said. Then, a beat later, "Yes. But not about the dragon." "About what, then?" She was quiet for a moment. Looked at the fire. "About what happens after," she said. "The tournament has tasks. The tasks will end." And then, she stopped. Looked at him. "I am going to go back to France and you are going to stay here and the bond does not care about geography." "No," Harry said. "It doesn't. My grandmother says it gets stronger with proximity and sustained contact." She said it in the academic way she sometimes talked about the bond, which was her way of holding it at a distance and examining it rather than being examined by it. "I have been here 3 weeks and I can feel it more clearly than I could before." "I know," Harry said. "I can too." "That does not frighten you?" "No." He thought about it. "Does it frighten you?" She considered the fire for a moment, and the honesty that she brought to most things brought her to say, "A little." "Not the bond." She searched for the word. "The wanting," she said finally. "To stay. That is not the bond. The bond is old and below everything. The wanting to stay is mine, and I have known you for 3 weeks, and that is," she made a small sound of frustration that was very French and very herself. "It is faster than I am comfortable with." Harry looked at her. She looked at the fire. He said, "I think you should tell me that again in about 6 months." She looked at him sharply. "Not because I don't," he stopped. Started again. "I've known about you for 4 years. I've been thinking about this for 4 years. I know something about what you are to me. But I don't want you to, I want it to be what you choose, not what the bond or 3 weeks decided." He held her gaze. "So come back. After the tournament, find a way to come back. Or write. And in 6 months or a year, when you know it's yours and not circumstance, tell me again." She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "You are very strange," and this time it was entirely a compliment. "So I keep being told," Harry said. She stood up, smoothed her clothes, and moved toward the portrait hole with her usual composure reassembled. At the portrait she turned back. Harry. Yeah. If you die tomorrow, I will be very annoyed. He looked at her. If I die tomorrow, he said, you're welcome to be. She left. Harry sat with the fire and the warmth in his chest and thought about the task and about what she'd said. The wanting to stay is mine, and he put it in the part of his mind where important things sat and let it rest there, patient, like the coal it had always felt like. The first task arena was loud. 11,000 people, maybe, the stands full, the noise coming down in waves. Harry waited in the tent with his wand and his intentions and the warmth in his chest doing nothing dramatic, steady, patient, the compass note of it pointing at the stands where he could feel her watching. He was fourth. He watched Fleur go first from the monitoring mirror in the tent and she was extraordinary, the charm worked perfectly, the horntail turned docile at the face and she went past it with a composure that earned a standing ovation from half the stands. One of her shoes scorched, minor, she didn't acknowledge it. Crumb was brutal and efficient. Cedric was clever, he transfigured a rock into a dog and used the distraction. Both got their eggs. Harry's dragon was a Hungarian horntail and it was, the handler confirmed, the most aggressive of the four, which was information Harry acknowledged and set aside. He stepped into the arena and felt the roar of the crowd hit him and the horntail turned its massive head toward him and snorted a tongue of fire that turned the dirt between them to glass. He looked at it. Accio Firebolt, he said, and held up his hand. From somewhere in the stands, his broom came. He was on it before the horntail had finished processing the movement, and the firebolt under him was the firebolt, the best broom in the world, and the warmth in his chest moving outward into it the way it always did and the broom responding like it knew exactly what was needed, and he rode the dragon like riding weather, in and out, adjusting, never where it expected him, covering the arena in a way that made the crowd eventually stop making individual sounds and become one continuous noise. He got the egg in under 3 minutes. He landed and held it up and the noise was extraordinary. In the stands, Fleur Delacour watched him land and took her hand from her collarbone where it had rested since his name was called, and said something in French under her breath that her chaperone gave her a look about, and she met her chaperone's look with perfect composure and said nothing else. The scores came out. Harry had tied Fleur for first. In the champion's tent afterward, she came in and looked at him and said, "Your shoe is not scorched." "No," Harry said. "Show off," she said, which was the warmest thing she'd said to him in 3 weeks, and she said it in English, and it was entirely, completely hers. Chapter 4, What the Bond Costs. The egg screamed. Every champion had one, the golden egg from the first task, hinged at the middle, and when you opened it underwater it sang. Harry had figured this out in November by the simple expedient of filling a bathtub in his private room and holding the egg under the surface while he sat on the bathroom floor with his ear against the rim of the tub, listening. The song resolved into words, and the words told him about mere people and the lake and something taken and an hour to retrieve it. He told Fleur at breakfast the next morning. She looked at him over her coffee and said, "You have had your own room this whole time and you used the bathtub for egg research." "Where else was I going to do it?" "There is a lake," she said. "It's November," Harry said. "The lake is freezing." She made the small French sound of someone who has encountered an argument they technically cannot fault. "Fine. Underwater task. Gillyweed, probably, or a bubblehead charm. I will use the charm." She looked at her notes. "What is taken?" "Something. Someone, we'd miss." The song said what we'd sorely miss. He paused. "I think it'll be a person. Someone we care about." Fleur looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at the Gryffindor table, at Ron, who was 3 seats down arguing with George Weasley about something Quidditch-related and laughing with his whole face the way he did when he was genuinely happy. Then she looked at her own table, at a small girl with the same white blonde hair sitting near the end, eating a croissant with careful concentration. "My sister," Fleur said quietly. Gabrielle. How old? 8. Harry looked at the small blonde girl. They won't actually let her drown, he said. The task has rules. I'm certain of it. I know, Fleur said. She looked back at her coffee. Certain does not mean comfortable. No, Harry agreed. It doesn't. He reached across the table and put his hand briefly over hers, not as a gesture of romance but the way you touched someone who was carrying something, brief, deliberate, present. She looked at his hand and then at him, and he took his hand back and went back to his eggs, and neither of them made anything of it, which was its own kind of thing. The Yule Ball was announced in the second week of December and the tournament rules required champions to open the dancing, which meant Harry needed a partner. He asked Fleur, which was the obvious answer, on a Thursday afternoon in the library, in the same direct way he did most things, while she was annotating Hermione's translation of Arsenault and Hermione was annotating her own annotations. Fleur looked up. Yes, she said, and went back to annotating. Hermione looked at Harry over her own parchment with an expression that said she had 17 opinions about this and was exercising extraordinary restraint. Say it, Harry said. I wasn't going to say anything. Hermione. She set down her quill. You asked her to a school dance in a library while she was working, she said. It worked, obviously, but, she said yes immediately, Harry said. Yes, because Hermione stopped. Reconsidered. Looked at Fleur. Were you hoping for something more? It was fine, Fleur said, with complete serenity. I do not require performance. I require directness. She looked at Harry. The dress robes, though, already got them, Harry said. Dark green. McGonagall made me order them in October. Fleur made a considering sound. Dark green, she said, and went back to her work. Hermione looked between them for a moment. Then she picked up her quill. You are both very strange, she said, and she said it in the exact same tone Fleur had used the night before the first task, which meant she'd been listening, and the fact that she was using it now was its own quiet kind of acceptance. The ball was December 25th and Harry and Fleur opened the dancing and it was approximately as uncomfortable as formal dancing always is for people who have not done much formal dancing, except that Fleur had done quite a lot and Harry learned fast and by the second song they were functional and by the third they were good, which was sufficient. What was not sufficient was Ron. Ron had waited too long to ask anyone and had ended up, miserable, taking Padma Patil as a last resort after Hermione had refused to tell him who she was going with. Ron had spent the last 3 weeks in a specific kind of emotional confusion that Harry recognized, jealousy, yes, but not quite about Hermione, more about the sense that things were moving and he was standing still. He was 17 observations and 2 decisions behind himself, which was a Ron Weasley condition that Harry had learned to be patient with. At the ball, Ron watched Hermione arrive with Viktor Krum and his face did the thing it did when Ron was feeling something strongly and refusing to identify it, going red and then stiff and then performatively indifferent. And then Hermione, looking genuinely beautiful in robes that were a very specific shade of periwinkle blue that she had clearly chosen with intention, sat down at a table that was not Ron's, and Ron watched Viktor Krum pull out her chair, and something locked down in Ron's expression like a door being shut. Harry watched this from the dance floor and thought, he's going to say something stupid later. He did. After midnight, when the ball was winding down and Ron and Hermione ended up in the same corridor going back to Gryffindor Tower, Harry heard the raised voices from 20 feet away. He didn't go closer. He looked at Fleur, who was beside him. Should you? She started. No, Harry said. Some things work themselves out better without help. She considered this. That is either very wise or very convenient. Tonight it's both, Harry said. She almost smiled. It was more visible now, the almost smile. He'd been learning its variations over 2 months. The argument that carried back through the corridor was about Crumb being a famous Quidditch player and Hermione going with him as a prize, and Hermione's voice going up with a specific frequency that meant she was furious in the way that was cold rather than hot. Harry caught fragments. He asked me. You had weeks. A person. Not a prize. Then a door. Then silence. Ron came around the corner with his hands in his pockets and his ears red and saw Harry and stopped. Don't, Ron said. I wasn't going to say anything, Harry said. Ron looked at Fleur. She's going to be angry for ages. Probably, Harry said. She looked, Ron stopped. Started again. She looked really, I mean. The robes. I know, Harry said. Ron made a sound of profound personal suffering and went up to the dormitory. Harry and Fleur stood in the corridor and Fleur said, he is in love with her. Yes. Does he know? He's starting to figure it out, Harry said. He'll get there. She looked at the direction Ron had gone. Your friends are very, she paused for the right word. Human? Harry offered. I was going to say dramatic, she said. But also human. Yes. January brought Hermione's crisis, which was not dramatic. That was the thing about it. It arrived quietly, with the specific character of something that had been building for a long time. It started in charms. Flitwick asked her to demonstrate a summoning charm, standard, basic, the kind of thing Hermione had been doing correctly since second year, and she raised her wand and said Accio, and the object, a glass paperweight from Flitwick's desk, moved about 4 inches and stopped. The class went quiet. Hermione looked at the paperweight. She looked at her wand. She tried again. 3 inches. A grinding, effortful movement like something wading through resistance. Flitwick looked at her with concern. Miss Granger, are you feeling well? I'm fine, she said. Her voice was completely steady. I'm fine, Professor. I'm sorry. Harry was sitting 2 rows back. He saw the color leave her face and come back different, not the flushed red of embarrassment but the high, brittle pink of someone holding themselves together by force of will. He saw her sit down and put her wand carefully on the desk and look at the front of the room with an expression that was perfectly composed on the surface, and underneath it, he could see, was something close to panic. After class he caught up with her in the corridor. She was walking fast, which was how Hermione walked when she was upset. She walked it off, head down, books clutched to her chest. Hermione. I'm fine. I know you're not. She stopped. She turned around and looked at him and said, It's worse, Harry. It's been getting worse since October, and I thought if I stopped, if I didn't trigger it anymore, but it's still. She stopped. Breathed. 4-inch Accio. I couldn't even. Flitwick was looking at me. Come on, Harry said. He looked around the corridor. Come and find Fleur. We're going to sit down and go through this properly. I don't need, Hermione. His voice was not harsh. Just certain. You've been trying to solve this alone for 3 months and it's getting worse. Let us help. She looked at him for a moment. The composure held, but just barely, at the edges. Then she nodded once and followed him. They found Fleur in the courtyard with her nose in a book that was, inevitably, in French, and she looked up when she saw Hermione's face and closed the book without being asked. They went to Harry's room, the private room he'd insisted on in first year and Dumbledore had provided, a decent-sized space off the Gryffindor corridor with a lock on the door and a window that looked over the grounds, and Harry made tea on the small cast-iron stove that had appeared along with the room, which was either Dumbledore's doing or the castle's own obscure generosity, and they sat, the 3 of them, and Hermione talked. It took a while to come out. Not because she was reluctant, she was too precise for extended reluctance, but because she'd been very thorough in her own analysis and she had a great deal of data to present, and presenting it helped her, Harry understood, the same way writing things down helped some people. By the time she'd finished talking, her tea was cold and her hands were still and she looked both worse and better, which was the particular state of having said something out loud that you've been carrying alone. 4 inches on an accio, Fleur said. She was not looking at Hermione with pity, which Harry knew Hermione would not have wanted. She was looking at her with the focused assessment she brought to problems. What is your strongest spell currently? Shield Charm. Cast at myself. Hermione's mouth was tight. Not at anyone else. Spells directed at yourself are unaffected, Fleur said. Spells directed at objects are reduced but functional. Spells directed at other people, almost nothing, Hermione said. And not just Harry. Anyone. It's generalized. Harry set down his mug. That's new, he said. I know. Fleur looked at Harry. Harry looked at Fleur. He could see her running through the same Arsenault text he was running through, both of them arriving at the same footnote in the secondary appendix that neither of them had paid much attention to because it was a what-if buried in academic language, but which said, in essence, that sustained triggering of the bond's protective response could over time create a kind of magical feedback, not just weakening the specific spells directed at the chosen, but creating a generalized suppression, as if the magic had learned a pattern and applied it broadly. It's a pattern response, Harry said. Your magic learned to suppress at the trigger point and now it's applying the suppression more broadly. Hermione stared at him. Can that be reversed? I don't know, Harry said honestly. Hermione absorbed this. She put her mug down very carefully. Tell me the worst case, she said. Don't soften it. Harry and Fleur exchanged a look. Progressive, Fleur said. Without reversal. Eventually, she paused. Chose carefully. Eventually the active magic diminishes to the point of squib-level function. You retain your magical nature but lose the ability to wield it. The room was very quiet. Outside, snow was coming down across the grounds in soft irregular curtains. Hermione sat with this for a long, specific silence. Harry watched her and did not fill the silence, because some things needed the space they were owed. He watched her face move through something, not breakdown, not despair, something more complicated. The specific reckoning of a person who has done an enormous amount of damage with good intentions and is being presented with the bill. I did this to myself, she said at last. The mechanism did it, Harry said. The mechanism responded to my actions, she said. I used magic on you without asking. I managed you. I overrode your choices because I thought I was protecting you and I thought I knew better. She looked at her wand, lying on the table between them. How many times? How many times did I, the Wingardium Leviosa? The shield charm in the bathroom. Second year when she stopped. I cast a confundus on you. Third year. When you were going to talk to Sirius alone and I was frightened and I know, Harry said quietly. She looked at him sharply. You knew? I felt something wrong. I didn't know it was you specifically until later. She closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them they were dry. She was not a person who cried easily and she was not going to start now, but they were very direct and they were looking at him with a quality that was not self-pity but was something honest underneath it. I am sorry, Harry. Not because of what it's done to my magic. Because it was wrong. I know, he said again. I do know that. I should have, I told myself I was asking. I told myself I was better at it. But asking and then doing what you plan to do anyway if they said no is not asking. It's announcing. She picked up her wand and put it in her pocket. I didn't respect your autonomy and I told myself it was love and it wasn't, it was control, and I am. Her voice caught once and she stopped it. I'm sorry. Harry looked at her. He said, Hermione. You are one of the best people I know. You are also someone who does the thing intelligent people do, which is believe that knowing more than someone means you know better than someone. Those are different things. She looked at him. The damage might not be permanent, he said. We don't know yet. Fleur's grandmother is coming in February, Madame Delacour, not Fleur's mother, the grandmother, and she knows more about this than any text. We'll ask her. And if it is permanent? Then we figure out what that means, Harry said. And you find other ways to be what you are, because you are not your magic, Hermione. You never have been. He held her gaze. You're the person who figured out polyjuice in second year and logic ed her way through the potions corridor in first year and taught me French grammar when I asked because you thought it was important that I learn it properly. That's not your wand. That's you. Fleur, who had been quiet for several minutes, said, she is correct about the grandmother. She will know what can be done. She paused. And she will not be kind about it. She is not a kind woman. But she is an honest one, and honest is more useful than kind. Hermione looked at Fleur for a moment. Then she said, is she frightening? Extremely, Fleur said. You will like her. Hermione made a sound that was not quite a laugh but was somewhere in the same family, and it broke something in the room, the specific tension of shared difficult truth, and she picked up her cold tea and said, right. Well. Can we talk about the second task? Because if my general casting ability is compromised, I cannot be the only researcher going into that lake with no preparation, and I refuse to just sit on the stands and watch. No one suggested you sit on the stands, Harry said. Good, she said. Then let's work. Apollon Delacour, Fleur's grandmother, not her mother, who was named Apollon as well, which had required some early clarification, arrived at Hogwarts in the second week of February on the back of no announcement and no ceremony. She was old in the way that Fleur would never be old. She had moved through whatever she had been in her youth and come out the other side into something entirely else. Her hair was white and she wore it pinned. Her eyes were still silver. Her face had the particular quality of very old wood, worn to exactly the shape it had always been trying to become. She walked into Dumbledore's office like she'd been there before, which she had, and Dumbledore sat across his desk from her and Harry sat in a chair to one side and Fleur stood near the window and Hermione sat in the other chair with her spine straight and her hands folded, and Madame Delacour looked around at all of them and said, in English that was slightly more formal than Fleur's and entirely without warmth, so this is what it has come to. Thank you for coming, Dumbledore said. You did not summon me, she said. My granddaughter did. I would not have come for you. She looked at Harry. He looked back. He had the impression she was checking something, the way you test the load-bearing quality of something you're about to trust your weight to. He let her look. You are the one, she said. So I'm told, Harry said. Something moved in her face. Not the almost smile he knew from Fleur, something older and more considered. And you have not, she said, hidden from it. No. Good. She sat down in the chair that Dumbledore's office had produced for her, as old chairs in old rooms sometimes produce themselves at the right moment. That is the first thing. Many chosen ones hide. They reject the bond, they run from the girl, they decide it is an imposition or an embarrassment and they spend a decade being angry at circumstances instead of learning their own nature. You have not done this. I read the books, Harry said. Books are the beginning, she said. Not the end. She looked at Hermione. You are the one whose magic is diminishing. Yes, Hermione said. Tell me the timeline. Precise, please. I do not have patience for approximations. Hermione told her. Precisely, because Hermione did not do approximations either, and in this, as Fleur had predicted, they got along extremely well in the manner of two people who respect each other's standards without particularly liking each other yet. Madame Delacour listened without interrupting and with the focused stillness of someone who is hearing the actual information beneath the information being presented. When Hermione finished, Madame Delacour was quiet for a while. Then she said, the confundus in third year. How long did it last? Hermione blinked. About 12 minutes. And you maintained the casting deliberately for that duration? Yes. That is the one, Madame Delacour said. That is the one that generalized it. The others, the Wingardium Leviosa, the shield attempt in the bathroom, these created the initial suppression at the trigger point. Typical bond behavior. Expected, reversible with cessation of the cause. She folded her hands. The confundus was different. Sustained, deliberate, intended to deprive the chosen of his own judgment. The bond treats this differently to incidental contact. It treats this as, she looked for the English. Subjugation. An attempt to subjugate the chosen's will. And it responded as though the generalized suppression was now warranted. The office was quiet. Fleur was looking at the window. Harry was looking at Hermione. Hermione was looking at Madame Delacour with the expression of someone receiving a sentence. Is it reversible? Harry asked. Madame Delacour looked at him. That, she said, depends on two things. The first is time. Complete cessation of triggering behavior over an extended period, years, not months, has in 3 documented cases produced partial restoration. Perhaps 40 to 60% of original capability. And the second thing? Hermione said. The second is the chosen himself. She looked at Harry. The bond's protection is his, not mine, and not the bond's to revoke. A chosen can, with sufficient knowledge of the bond and sufficient intent, choose to release the suppression as a deliberate act. She paused. It has been done once in the recorded history. It requires that the chosen accept the risk to themselves that this represents, and it requires that the person who caused the damage be genuinely, not performatively, changed. Harry was quiet for a moment. Can I ask you something? You will ask it regardless, Madame Delacour said. Why does the bond exist? Harry said. Not the mechanics. The why. She looked at him with those silver eyes that were Fleur's eyes by 40 years, and she said, because Veela are rare and what they carry is irreplaceable, and the world does not understand what it does when it destroys them. The bond is the blood's answer to a world that diminishes its chosen people. A pause. In older times, Veela were hunted. Used. The bond evolved as a protection for both the Veela and the person the Veela's blood recognized as, she stopped. Chose carefully. As kin. Not romantically. Magically. A resonance in the magical signature that the blood knows before the mind does. Like a tuning fork, Harry said. She looked at him sharply. Yes. Exactly like that. Something in her expression recalibrated again. Where did you encounter that metaphor? Ollivander, Harry said. When I got my wand. Madame Delacour looked at Dumbledore. Dumbledore looked at his desk. She looked back at Harry. What else did Ollivander say? To trust it, Harry said. He said it knows the way better than my mind does. Madame Delacour sat with this. Then she said, to Fleur, in French, he is what you hoped. Fleur, still at the window, said nothing. But Harry heard the breath she let out, the specific quality of a breath held for a very long time being finally, quietly released. He didn't speak French well enough for real-time translation, but he'd been reading it for 2 years and the words were close enough to the written form that he got the gist. He kept his face neutral and looked at the middle distance, and the warmth in his chest did something that was entirely too close to delight, and he told it to behave. Madame Delacour rose from her chair. I will write down what you need to know about the release, she said to Harry. What it requires, what it costs, what it cannot do. You will read it. You will not act on it quickly, you will think about it for at least a month. This is not a small thing. She looked at Hermione. In the meantime, you will stop managing him entirely. Not 90%. Not with good intentions. Entirely. I know, Hermione said. Do you? Madame Delacour's voice was not unkind, but it was sharp, the way a good knife is sharp. You are a remarkable person, child. Genuinely. But you have spent a long time in the habit of being the most capable person in the room and believing that this entitles you to make decisions for other people. It does not. It never did. A pause. And you know this. The reason you are here, telling me the timeline precisely, the reason your spine is straight and you have not cried and you are not asking me for reassurance, is because you already know all of this. You are sitting here having the experience of hearing it said out loud. Hermione was quiet for a long moment. Then, yes. Good, Madame Delacour said. That is honest. Honesty is the beginning. She moved toward the door. Stopped. Looked at Dumbledore one last time. And you, she said. Dumbledore looked at her. You have been managing him too, she said. With considerably more sophistication and considerably more affection, but the mechanism is the same. She let that sit. The bond does not distinguish between enemies and people who love someone and think that love gives them the right to arrange them. She opened the door. He is not a piece on your board, Albus. He has never been. She left. The office was very quiet. Fawkes ruffled his feathers on his perch. One of the portraits coughed. Dumbledore sat at his desk and looked at his hands for a long moment. Harry watched him. And then Dumbledore said, quietly, she has always frightened me considerably. She's wonderful, Fleur said from the window. The second task was February 24th. Harry had the gillyweed, Neville had found it, which was its own long and somewhat chaotic story involving the library, herbology book that Neville had read purely because it interested him, and a moment of Neville handing Harry a handful of grey-green sludge with quiet pride that Harry had responded to with complete and genuine gratitude. Ron was in the lake, already sedated, waiting to be retrieved. Fleur's sister Gabrielle was there too. Harry dived off the platform and the gillyweed worked and he went down into the black cold of the lake and navigated by the warmth in his chest, which did not hesitate, which pointed him through the darkness and the weeds and the Grindylow territory and delivered him to the underwater village in just under 30 minutes. The champions arrived at the hostages. Krum was there, shark-headed and direct. Cedric arrived 30 seconds after Harry, doing something competent with a bubblehead charm. Ron was there, tied to a statue, unconscious and pale. Hermione, Krum's person, was there, her bushy hair floating around her face. And there, at the end of the line of hostages, small and white-haired and alive, was Gabrielle Delacour, 8 years old, tied with the same ropes and unconscious and clearly fine but clearly also very much underwater. Krum took Hermione. Cedric took his hostage. Harry untied Ron. Ron blinked awake immediately and said, "Bloody hell, it's cold," with the specific Weasley instinct for inappropriate timing, and then Harry looked at Gabrielle. Still tied. The merpeople were already moving in the way that meant the other champions' retrieval was prompting them toward the next stage of the task. Ron surfaced. Harry stayed. Fleur had not arrived. Something had stopped her, Harry found out later. The Grindylows had attacked her before she made it far enough down and her bubblehead charm had broken and she'd been dragged back to the surface. She was sitting on the bank right now, wrapped in a blanket, being told her sister was fine, trusting that her sister was fine, and the trust was costing her visibly because trusting that the people you love are fine is different from knowing it. Harry untied Gabrielle. He brought her up, and Ron helped from the surface, and when they broke the water and Harry had Gabrielle's head above the surface she coughed and blinked and the merpeople who had been following him up made the sound that was, apparently, a merperson expression of reluctant approval, and Harry got a second highest task score behind Cedric for bringing up 2 hostages and the judges specifically commended the quality of his moral decision-making. On the bank, Fleur fell to her knees in the snow and wrapped Gabrielle in her arms and held her very still and very tight and said something in French that was too fast and too private for Harry to translate. and when she looked up at Harry over Gabrielle's shoulder her eyes were full, which was the only time in 4 months he had seen that, and she said, "Merci," and she said it in the way people say things that they mean entirely. "She's fine," Harry said. "She was never in real danger. The task had rules." "I know," Fleur said. "But you stayed." "Yes," Harry said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she stood up, keeping Gabrielle tucked against her side, and she said, "Come to dinner tonight. I will bribe the Beauxbatons cook for something that is not stodge." "Stodge?" Harry said. "Is that not the word?" She gestured. "Stodge," Ron confirmed, appearing at Harry's elbow dripping lake water and already looking better. "Yeah, that's the word." Fleur looked at Ron. "You too," she said, which was not what Ron had been expecting, and his face went through 6 expressions in 2 seconds. "You protected Hermione in 3rd year." "Genuinely." "I saw. You stood beside him." "You are welcome." Ron looked at Harry. Harry said nothing. Ron looked back at Fleur and said, "Right. Yeah. Cheers," in a voice that was trying to be casual and was not remotely casual, and Harry put a hand on his shoulder and steered him toward dry ground. March arrived cold and bright and brought with it an escalation that Harry had been watching gather for months. It started with Bartemius Crouch Sr. disappearing from his ministry duties, which Hermione noted in the Daily Prophet and flagged in the margins in red ink the way she flagged things that connected to other things. It continued with the maze preparations in the grounds, the hedges growing taller by the week, the Triwizard Cup placed at the center like a fixed point in an increasingly unstable system. And it continued with the quality of Moody's classes, which had always been useful and strange, tipping over into something that felt less like education and more like preparation. Harry noticed it the way he noticed things, piece by piece, building until the shape emerged. Moody's eyes lingered on Harry differently than they had in September. The magical eye, specifically. The real eye tracked the class. The magical eye tracked Harry, with the specific attention of something waiting for an outcome. He mentioned it to Fleur in early March, in the courtyard where she was teaching Gabrielle, who had been allowed to stay for the remainder of the year, at Madame Maxime's permission and Fleur's persistent lobbying, a charm for repelling midges, which Gabrielle was approaching with a focus that was very small and very serious. "Moody's watching me," Harry said. "The false eye." "Constantly." Fleur looked at her sister and then at Harry. "You think he is connected to what happened with the goblet?" "He had access. He knows the tournament. And the eye goes through walls, which means he can track where I am in the castle at any point." Harry paused. "He's been helpful, this year. Too helpful. In a targeted way." "He is preparing you," Fleur said. "For something specific." "The maze," Harry said. "Something's going to happen in the maze. That's what the whole year has been pointed at." She was quiet. Gabrielle's charm produced a satisfying pop and a cloud of midges dispersed from around her head, and she looked up at Fleur with the expression of someone who wants approval and is fairly confident it's coming. "Très bien," Fleur told her, and then to Harry, "I will be in that maze. I know. Whatever is going to happen, I am not going to be kept from it." "I know," Harry said again. He looked at her. "I wouldn't try." She looked at him. Then, "You are the only person who has ever said that to me without sounding resigned about it." "Why would I be resigned? You're more useful than most people I know." She looked at him for a long moment with those silver eyes doing the assessment thing, and then she said, "Harry," in the same way she'd said it the night before the first task, just his name, no weight of history or story. "After the tournament," she said. "I said to tell you again in 6 months. Or a year. It has been almost 6 months." He looked at her. The courtyard was quiet. Gabrielle had found a butterfly and was watching it with total absorption, because she was 8 and butterflies were more interesting than adult conversation. The warmth in his chest was doing the thing that was not the bond and not the compass and not the warning note. The thing that had been making up its mind since October. The wanting to stay, Harry said. Is it still yours? Entirely, she said. No hesitation. He held her gaze. Then stay, he said. After the tournament. Find a way to stay. She looked at him steadily. I will need to go home first, she said. My grandmother will want a full account. My mother will cry. Gabrielle will talk about it for a year. A pause. But I will come back. Good, Harry said. It was not a declaration. It was not a moment designed for memory. It was just two people deciding something, practical and honest and theirs, and the warmth in Harry's chest was the color of something that had finally arrived. Chapter 5, The Graveyard and the Girl Made of Fire. The maze went in at dusk. Harry stood at the entrance with the other champions and watched the hedges stretch up 20 feet on either side and thought about everything that was wrong with this specific evening. The quality of the air was wrong, too still, the kind of stillness that comes before weather, except the sky was clear. The crowd was too loud in the way crowds go loud when they're nervous and covering it. And Moody was standing near the judge's table with the magical eye pointed directly at Harry and the real eye pointed at nothing, the unfocused gaze of a man running something in his head. Ron was in the stands with the Weasleys. Hermione was there too, and Harry had looked for her when he came out and she'd given him a small nod that meant come back, which was more from her than most people got. He'd nodded back. Fleur was to his left, 3 feet away, in her powder blue robes with her hair pulled back and her wand loose in her hand. She looked like someone who had decided how this evening was going to go and was simply waiting for it to cooperate. The warmth, she said quietly, without looking at him. Flat and guarded, Harry said, equally quiet. Same as when something's wrong. She nodded once. Said nothing else. The cannon went and the champions spread out. Cedric went left. Krum went straight. Harry went right. Fleur went right too, 2 seconds behind him, far enough to give him clear space but close enough that they were in the same sector of the maze. This was not accidental. They had looked at the maze layout from the air. Harry had flown over it on his firebolt 2 days before the task and memorized the large-scale structure, and they'd agreed on rough sectors without it counting as collaboration because the rules said nothing about sector preference and everything about the final cup. If the maze tried to separate them, it would have to work at it. It worked at it. The first junction split Harry left and Fleur straight ahead, the hedges closing between them with a grinding vegetable slowness. Harry went left and navigated 2 scroots with the clean efficiency of someone who had fought worse things, using a blasting curse for the first and a stunning spell for the second because wasting effort was its own kind of losing. He found a blast-ended scroot asleep against a hedge and went around it very quietly. He found a boggart that tried to become a cemetery, a graveyard with grey headstones and cold grass, and his chest went flat and guarded again, and he vanished it with a ridiculous that turned it into something harmless and moved on. The warmth told him where Fleur was. Not in words or images, it wasn't that specific. But there was a directional quality to it, the compass note, that oriented him even through 20 feet of dense magical hedge, and he knew she was east and moving and that she hadn't triggered the flat guarded feeling, which meant she was all right. He found Cedric 20 minutes in, on the ground in a side corridor of the maze with his wand out of reach and his eyes open and his face confused in the specific way that meant something had just happened to his mind. Harry crouched next to him and checked him over and said, "Krum hit you with something." Cedric blinked. His eyes focused. "What?" "Krum. Victor Krum. He hit you with a curse. The Imperius curse, I think, the eyes." Harry had seen the Imperius curse demonstrated in Moody's class often enough to know the specific quality of the confusion it left behind. "Can you walk?" Cedric sat up. Tested himself. "Yeah." He looked at Harry. "Why did Krum wouldn't, someone made him," Harry said. He helped Cedric up. You need to get out of the maze. I'm not quitting Cedric. Harry held his gaze. Someone in this maze has been under Imperius. The same someone who put my name in the goblet. The tournament is a mechanism and we are at the end of the mechanism. He paused. Get out. Red sparks, emergency exit. Get Dumbledore. Cedric looked at him. Looked at the maze. And you? I'm going to the center, Harry said. Someone has to. He went. The maze tried 3 more things before he got to the center, a tunnel of darkness that made sounds, a strange gravitational pull that wanted him going sideways, and a hedge that was simply solid where the map said there should be a gap. He handled them in sequence, adapting, not stopping to make them perfect, just through and moving, and the warmth in his chest was a beat of direction and the flat guarded note was getting louder and the center of the maze was close. He heard Fleur before he saw her. Not in trouble, that was the first thing he heard, the quality of sound that told him she was not in distress but was in motion and was deliberately making noise because she was navigating toward the same point and she knew he could orient on sound. A charm, cast clearly, producing a crack of impact against a hedge, marking position. He was 30 feet away. He turned toward it. The hedge opened. She came through at a run, robes intact, wand up, with a boggart snake dissipating behind her in a coil of smoke, and she took in Harry's position and fell into step with him without breaking stride and said, "Crumb is down. I found him near the east corridor after he came around. Under Imperius. Someone in the maze or near it was controlling him. I know. I could feel it from outside the control, a foreign magic trying to use him." Her jaw was tight. "I hate that curse." "Me too," Harry said. They were at the center of the maze 30 seconds later. The Triwizard Cup sat on a plinth in a wide clearing, golden and humming with the particular resonance of something deeply enchanted. The clearing was lit from nowhere, even, sourceless light. It should have felt like a finish line. It felt like a held breath before a door opens. They stood at the edge of the clearing. "Trophy is a portkey," Harry said. He had run this conclusion 2 weeks ago and given it time to sit and it had only become more solid. Touch it and you're gone. Somewhere specific. Somewhere prepared. Fleur looked at the cup. "A portkey to where?" "I don't know the where. I know the why." He looked at her. "Voldemort." She was quiet for a moment. "You want to go," she said. "Not a question." "Someone's been trying to deliver me to him all year," Harry said. "I'd rather go on my terms than wait for them to find a better mechanism." "Your terms," she said carefully, "or both of our terms." He looked at her. She looked at him, and her chin was level and her eyes were doing the thing where they were very clear and very direct, and she said, "I am coming with you." "Fleur, you said you would not try to keep me from it." "That was the maze," Harry said. This is the same sentence," she said. "You said you wouldn't try." She held his gaze. "And I am telling you that whatever you are walking into, I will not send you in alone. Not tonight." A pause. "The bond tells me something is wrong. It has been telling me all evening. I am not letting that feeling stand while you disappear into a portkey." Harry looked at her. He looked at the cup. He looked at the flat guarded note in his chest, which was not about the cup but was about whatever was on the other side of the cup, and it was loud, it was the loudest it had been since Quirrell's hands. "Stay close," he said. "I was born close," she said, which was not quite a joke but was in the same family. They grabbed the cup together. The portkey took them sideways through space in the lurching, nauseating way of portkeys, and deposited them in a graveyard. Exactly the graveyard the boggart had tried to show him. Grey headstones. Cold grass. A church tower against the dark sky. Dark enough that the stars were visible and cold enough that their breath misted in front of them. Harry spun immediately, taking in the space. Rows of headstones. A large yew tree in the southwest corner. An iron gate at the entrance, closed. And on the path between the headstones, a figure in dark robes holding something wrapped in cloth, moving toward them with a purposeful stride. "Hold him," the figure said, and Harry was hit with a full body-bind curse before he finished turning, which he had not expected to come from behind him, which meant there had been someone behind a headstone and he had not accounted for it. He hit the ground rigid beside a large grave marker, Thomas Riddle, 1905 to 1943, and from the ground he could see Fleur 20 feet away, who had moved the instant Harry's peripheral vision had registered the caster and had put a headstone between herself and the binding curse, and was now behind it. Good. She was free. He couldn't help yet, but she was free, and he would be shortly, because the body bind was coming from a man who was clearly Wormtail, and Wormtail's magic was functional, but it was not strong, and the warmth in Harry's chest was doing something he had never felt it do before. It was building. Not the warning note. Not the flat guarded feeling. Something that was taking everything from the past 4 years, the bond, his magic, all of it, and consolidating it, the way water consolidates into a wave. He had never felt this. He had felt the warmth surge at Quirrell's touch. He had felt it respond to threats. This was larger and more fundamental, like the thing it had always been preparing to do. He held very still on the cold grass and he listened and he waited. Wormtail put the bundle down in a cauldron that Harry now saw was in the center of the graveyard, large and dark and full of something liquid. The bundle moved. Harry looked at it, small, scaled, wrapped, and thought, that's not him yet. That's what he's been reduced to. They need the ritual. Wormtail began the ritual. The words were in Latin and they were old and they were horrible. Bone of the father, unknowingly given. A chunk of earth from Thomas Riddle's grave. Flesh of the servant, willingly sacrificed. Wormtail's silver hand went to his own arm and Harry heard the sound and chose not to process it because he had enough data to work with. Blood of the enemy, forcibly taken. Wormtail came toward Harry. And the body bind broke. Not because Harry forced it, the warmth did it, the building wave of it reaching a point where the external binding simply stopped cooperating, the same way Piers Pocus's hand had simply opened on Harry's arm 5 years ago in the yard behind the gym. The magic that had tried to bind the chosen without consent had been standing on ground that was not solid. Harry was on his feet before Wormtail crossed half the distance between them. He had his wand up and he said, "Don't," and Wormtail stopped. From behind the headstone on the other side of the graveyard, Fleur Delacour stood up. She stood up with her hair blazing silver-white in the dark, the Veela fire moving through her in the involuntary way it did when she was under extreme threat, the hair, the eyes gone full silver, the light that moved under her skin like something trying to get out. This was not the allure. This was something older. The allure made people want to please her. This made people afraid. Wormtail looked at her and his face went the color of old chalk. Peter Pettigrew, Harry said, and the name landed in the graveyard silence with the weight of documentation. You're going to step away from the cauldron. You can't. The ritual, Hill, step away from the cauldron, Harry said again. He was not shouting. He was not performing. His voice was the voice of someone who has made a decision and is informing the relevant parties. Wormtail, who had spent the better part of a year planning this and had just watched a body-bind curse that should have held through the entire ritual simply stop working, looked at Harry with something very close to animal terror. He didn't step away from the cauldron. He lunged at it. Harry hit him with a stunner that was full strength and absolutely direct, and Wormtail went down 6 feet from the cauldron. The wrapped bundle in the cauldron made a sound that was not quite a cry, thin, rageful, the sound of something that was once a person and is very aware of what it has become. Harry. Fleur's voice, sharp. The gate. The iron gate burst open and Death Eaters poured through. 12 of them, maybe 14, in dark robes and masks, moving with the organized purpose of people who had been told the ritual was happening tonight and had been in position outside the graveyard waiting for the signal. They spread around the perimeter between the headstones with practiced efficiency, and they had Harry and Fleur surrounded inside 10 seconds, which was clearly the plan. Harry stood in the center of the graveyard next to Thomas Riddle's grave and looked at the ring of Death Eaters and then at Fleur, who was standing 30 feet away, and the warmth in his chest was the wave, and the wave was cresting. He raised his wand. The first killing curse came from the northeast, green and fast and contemptuous, the way people cast spells at targets they consider beneath them. Harry moved, already moving before the caster finished the incantation, and the curse hit the grave marker beside him and the marble cracked. He sent a blasting curse back at the northeast headstone behind which the caster was crouching, and the headstone exploded and the caster went down under the debris. The graveyard erupted. But here was what the Death Eaters had not been told, what whoever was running this evening had not fully accounted for: the Veela fire was physical. When Fleur let the involuntary response go fully, the silver-white light was not metaphorical. It moved. It crossed the distance between her and the nearest group of Death Eaters in a wave of heat that was not quite fire but occupied the same territory, and 3 of them went down simultaneously, not dead, but on the ground and unable to stand, the masks cracked and the robes scorched and their voices producing sounds that were not words. Harry did not watch her. He trusted her to handle her half and handled his. He moved through the graveyard the way he moved on a firebolt, not where they expected him, adjusting in real time, using the headstones the way you use any terrain, which was as cover and distraction and obstacle rather than refuge. The curses coming at him were not all killing curses. Most of them were aimed to capture, which told him something important: someone had told them to bring Harry Potter back alive. The lethality was directed at Fleur. That made him angry. The angry clarity was not new. He'd had it in first year in the Mirror Chamber and in third year in the Shrieking Shack, but it was sharper here because it had a specific object. Someone had sent these people at Fleur specifically. Someone had decided that she was expendable where he was not. That was a decision that was going to cost them. He hit the Death Eater targeting Fleur from behind with a reducto that collapsed the headstone the man was crouching behind, and then he hit the exposed man with a stunner while he was still off balance, and the man went down, and Harry was already moving. 3 minutes into the fight, the ring of 14 Death Eaters had reduced to 7 standing. Fleur had 4 of the 7 fallen ones. Harry had 3. The 7 still standing had reorganized behind the largest monuments in the graveyard and were being cautious in a way that meant they were recalibrating their assessment of what they were dealing with. Good, Harry thought. Let them recalibrate. He reached Fleur behind the yew tree. She'd moved there when the numbers dropped and they were adjacent for the first time since the fight started. She was fully lit, the Veela fire banked but present, her eyes silver and her expression the focused, cold one he recognized from chess problems and complex potions and things she had decided to do. There was a burn on her forearm, shallow, from a passing curse, and she had not stopped to look at it. "The cauldron," she said. "I know. If Wormtail wakes up, he won't," Harry said. "I put him well down." He looked at the cauldron across the graveyard. The bundle inside it was still moving. "The ritual needs his blood," Harry said. "My blood? That's the only part left." "Then we don't give them my blood," she said. "No," he agreed. He looked at her. The 7 still standing. "We end this and then we go through that gate." "I counted 8, she said. He hadn't seen one. He looked at her and she tilted her head toward the church, where someone was at a window that was higher than the Death Eaters had been using. He readjusted. 8. "Together," he said. "Together," she said. They came out from behind the yew tree at the same time, moving in opposite arcs around the graveyard to split the target's attention, and what followed was not heroic in any formal sense, it was not clean or beautiful. It was fast and necessary, and the graveyard filled with the sounds of concrete cracking and spells casting and 8 people discovering that a 14-year-old boy who had been practicing dueling in his private room for 3 years and a 17-year-old Veela in full involuntary fire were substantially more than the evening's plan had accounted for. The one at the window tried to curse Fleur from behind while she had her back turned. Harry hit him with a shield charm, protego, cast at another person with full intent and Fleur's full awareness of what he was doing, which was the opposite of the bond's trigger, which was consent in both directions, and the curse rebounded and the man at the window was down. 8 on the ground. Wormtail still down. The bundle in the cauldron silent and still. Harry stood in the graveyard and breathed. The warmth in his chest was doing something he had no word for. It was at the crest of the wave and then it was passing the crest and coming down the other side, not diminishing but settling, the way a bell settles from the highest point of its ring into its long, sustained note. He felt it like vibration in his bones. Fleur was beside him. The fire was banking. She looked at the fallen Death Eaters, then at the cauldron, then at Harry, and she said, in a voice that was very controlled and very quiet, "Are you all right?" "Yes," he said. Then, because this was Fleur, mostly. "Are you?" She looked at her arm. "This will need something from Madame Pomfrey." She looked at the cauldron. "What is in there?" "What Voldemort has been reduced to," Harry said. "Whatever's left of him after," he stopped. Looked at the cauldron. The bundle was still. "He needs my blood and a willing servant and his father's bones. He has the bones. He had the servant until a few minutes ago." He walked to the cauldron and looked at the bundle, which was very small and very horrible, and he thought about what to do about it with the pragmatic precision he brought to problems that did not have clean solutions. "You can't destroy it," Fleur said, behind him. "It is still alive, in some form." "That is not, we cannot just." "No," Harry agreed. He looked at it. "But I can make very certain it never completes that ritual." He looked at the wands of the fallen Death Eaters. Summoned Wormtail specifically, the silver hand made him easy to identify, and pocketed it. "Evidence," he said. "The Ministry has been saying Wormtail is dead for 12 years. He looked at the cauldron one more time. Then he looked around the graveyard, the cracked headstones, the fallen figures, the iron gate still hanging open. He looked at Fleur. She was watching him with those silver eyes that were returning to their usual state, the fire almost entirely banked now, and she looked slightly less like a supernatural phenomenon and slightly more like a 17-year-old girl who had just been in a fight and was managing the adrenaline with the same composure she managed everything. "We need to go back," Harry said. "Through the port key." She looked at the Triwizard Cup, which had come with them and was on the grass 10 feet away, still warm from the traveling. "And then?" "And then," Harry said, "I tell Dumbledore everything, tonight, in front of witnesses, before he has a chance to decide how much I should know and how much should be managed." He looked at her. "Will you be there?" "Yes," she said, without hesitation. He picked up the cup. She put her hand next to his on the handle, not quite touching, waiting for his nod. He nodded. They took the port key back. They landed in the Hogwarts grounds to chaos. The crowd had been watching the maze for 40 minutes with no champions emerging and the energy of it had curdled from excitement to unease. When the port key deposited them on the grass outside the maze entrance, the noise that went through the stands was complicated, relief and shock and the specific confusion of people who have been watching something they don't understand. Harry let go of the cup. He was standing, which mattered. Fleur was standing. He looked at the stands and found Ron's red hair immediately, found Hermione beside him, both of them on their feet with expressions that had been through the full range of things. He gave them a nod that meant we're fine and Ron sat down heavily in the way of someone whose legs have just stopped cooperating. He looked for Dumbledore. Dumbledore was already moving, coming down from the judge's table with the specific velocity of someone who has been watching something go wrong and has been waiting to intervene. Behind him were Moody and McGonagall and Snape, and behind all of them, somewhere in the crowd, was a great deal of noise. Moody reached him first. That was wrong. Moody should not have reached him first. Dumbledore was closer and faster, but Moody had moved before anyone else, with the directional purposefulness of someone who had known where Harry was going to appear. Moody put a hand on Harry's shoulder and said, "Come with me." Harry looked at the hand on his shoulder. Looked up at Moody's face. The magical eye was spinning in its socket and the real eye was fixed and bright and doing something that was not the focused assessment of an auror but was closer to relief, the relief of someone whose plan has nearly worked. The warmth in his chest did the thing it did. The flat guarded note. From outside this time. From the hand on his shoulder. Not Moody's magic. Foreign magic. Someone else's magic, acting through someone else's body. "You're not him," Harry said. The eye stopped spinning. 1 second of absolute stillness. Harry twisted out from under the hand and put 3 feet of air between them and raised his wand and said, clearly, in the direction of the crowd and the approaching Dumbledore, "This isn't Moody. Polyjuice, or something like it. The real Moody is somewhere in the castle." The figure that was Moody looked at him. For a moment it was very still. And then it did what cornered things do, it moved fast, trying to get control of the situation before witnesses arrived. The wand came up. Dumbledore covered the remaining distance between him and Moody in under 2 seconds and cast something that hit Moody's wand arm and the wand spun away, and then Snape was there and McGonagall was there, and the crowd was pressed against the stand's barriers watching, and the figure wearing Moody's face looked at Dumbledore and its real eye went wide with something that was not Moody's disposition at all, and Harry thought, "This is what Voldemort's year in my school looked like." He turned to Fleur, who was standing to his left and had watched the entire thing unfold with an expression of focused calm. "The burn on your arm," he said. "Madame Pomfrey." "Now." "In a moment," she said. "I want to watch him be discovered." Fleur. 2 more minutes, she said. He sighed. He stayed. It was Bartemius Crouch Jr., who had been polyjuiced as Moody for the entire year. Dumbledore's finite broke the transformation and the real face that emerged was young and wild-eyed and looked at Harry with a very specific expression, the expression of someone who had spent a year in proximity to their target and had never quite been able to account for what they were dealing with. "How did you? The bodybind should have." "Yes," Harry said. "It should have." Crouch looked at him for another moment. Then Snape had him and that was the end of that conversation. Dumbledore turned to Harry. There were people everywhere now, ministry officials, Hogwarts staff, half the school pressing forward, parents in the stands. Dumbledore looked at Harry with those blue eyes that were, for once, entirely without their usual warmth, and what was in them instead was something rawer. Something that was reckoning with the fact that Harry had just come back from wherever the portkey had gone, standing, and had immediately identified an infiltrator that had been in their midst for 9 months. "We need to talk," Dumbledore said. "Yes," Harry said. "We do." He looked at the crowd. "Tonight. In front of Snape and McGonagall and Fleur and the Ministry if they want to be there. Not just you and me in your office." He held Dumbledore's gaze. "I'm not going to be managed around this, Professor. There are things that need to be heard by more than one set of ears." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. He looked at Fleur, who was standing at Harry's shoulder with her burned arm and her banked Veela fire and her expression that did not ask for permission to be present. He looked at the graveyard grass still on Harry's robes. "Yes," Dumbledore said. "All right." "Good," Harry said. He turned to Fleur. "Madame Pomfrey. Now." "Now," she agreed, which meant he'd won the argument by waiting her out, which he filed away as useful data. They debriefed in McGonagall's office, larger than Dumbledore's and containing, on short notice, Harry, Fleur, Hermione, Ron, McGonagall, Snape, Dumbledore, and a ministry official named Amelia Bones who had arrived in response to the reports of Death Eaters and had the quality of someone who deals in facts rather than narratives and intends to keep dealing in them. Harry talked for an hour. He was precise. He gave them Wormtail's wand, which he'd brought back in his pocket and which caused a very interesting 3 minutes when Amelia Bones confirmed it was registered to Peter Pettigrew, deceased. He described the ritual, the graveyard, the headstone, the Death Eaters, and the bundle in the cauldron, which produced a very specific silence when he described its appearance and movement. He described Fleur's role entirely. He did not minimize it. When two ministry officials in the back of the room began to ask whether a Triwizard champion from a foreign school had any business being in the graveyard, Harry looked at them and said, "She kept me alive. More precisely, she made a choice I would have had to override otherwise, and she was right to make it, and without her we would have had 2 fewer Death Eaters down and a great deal more trouble." He held the officials' eyes. "Are we done with that question?" The officials were done with that question. Amelia Bones asked precise and well-chosen questions. Snape looked at Harry throughout with his usual expression, which was complex and which Harry had long since categorized as something between professional antagonism and what might, in a different man, have been reluctant respect. Hermione took notes because she could not be in any room where important information was being discussed without taking notes. Ron sat beside Harry and said almost nothing, which was Ron's mode in situations where he understood that his job was presence rather than contribution, and did that job very well. After the debrief, when the ministry officials had left and it was only Dumbledore and the people Harry trusted, Dumbledore said, "The bundle in the cauldron. You're certain it was alive?" "Yes," Harry said. "And you left it there?" "I left 12 Death Eaters there. I expect your ministry can find a graveyard in Little Hangleton with 12 unconscious people in it." He paused. "The bundle is not a priority right now. The priority is making sure the ministry stops pretending this isn't happening." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. "Harry, he's back," Harry said. "Diminished, yes. Incomplete, yes. Not able to complete the ritual tonight, yes. But the intent is there and the followers are there and the mechanism exists." He looked at Dumbledore. "You know this already." "Yes," Dumbledore said. "So does the minister need to hear it from you or from me?" Snape said, very quietly, "From neither of you. From Amelia Bones, who just heard it from a primary witness in the presence of 6 other people and who has a piece of Peter Pettigrew's wand in her evidence bag." A pause. "Bones is not fudge. She deals in what's in front of her." Harry looked at Snape. Snape looked at Harry. Something passed between them that was too complicated to name but was real. "Then we need to make sure Bones has everything she needs," Harry said. "I'll handle it," Snape said. And then, as if the word cost him something, "Tonight." Harry nodded. He looked at Dumbledore. "I want the full truth about the prophecy," he said. "Whatever prophecy you've been holding. I know there is one. I've known since 2nd year." He held Dumbledore's gaze. "Not soon. Tonight." Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. The blue eyes were doing that reckoning thing, working through the arithmetic of what had just been said in front of witnesses and what it meant. Then he said, "Yes. All right." He said it with the quality of someone genuinely laying something down. Not reluctantly. With the specific tiredness of someone who has been carrying a plan for a long time and has just recognized that the plan has outgrown its original purpose. "Come to my office when you're ready." Harry looked at Fleur. She was sitting beside him with Madame Pomfrey's dressings on her arm and her expression in its normal state, composed, clear, entirely present. She had said almost nothing during the debrief, had not needed to, had answered Amelia Bones' specific questions about the graveyard fight with the same precision she brought to tournament preparation, and had been entirely, quietly credible. "You should sleep," she said. Before Dumbledore. "I will," he said. "Half an hour. Come with me as far as the tower." "Yes," she said. They walked through the castle together, which was quiet now, most students sent to their dormitories after the excitement on the grounds. The torches were low and the portraits were sleeping and the stone of the castle was the color of deep water in the half-dark. Fleur walked beside him with her bandaged arm and her loose hair, and the warmth in Harry's chest was not the wave anymore, was not the crest or the building or the warning. It was just its original nature, the coal, patient and present, steady as a heartbeat. At the foot of the Gryffindor stairs she stopped. Looked at him. "It worked," she said. "It worked," he agreed. "You knew it would." "I thought it would," he corrected. "There's a difference." She looked at him with those silver eyes. "Harry," she said. Just his name. The way she said it that wasn't weighted. "Go to bed, Fleur," he said. "Your arm needs rest." "My arm is fine." She was quiet for a moment. "Then, you were afraid." "In the graveyard." "I felt it." He looked at her. "The bond works that way? When you feel something strongly." She touched her collarbone, the same habit she'd had since the night it started, 4 years ago, in a stone house in Perpignan. "You were afraid and you did it anyway." "That's usually how it works," Harry said. She nodded. Looked at the stairs. Looked back at him. 6 months, she said. "You said that 3 hours ago." "I know," she said. "I'm saying it now again, when we are not in a graveyard." He looked at her for a moment. The torchlight and her silver eyes and the warmth in his chest that was entirely his own choice. "Fleur," he said. "Yes?" "After the tournament," he said, which was what he'd said before, and she'd said she would come back, and that promise was still standing. But tonight was different from March. Tonight they had been in a graveyard together and it had been hers and it had been his and neither of them was going to pretend otherwise. "I know," he said. "I know it's yours." She looked at him. The almost smile was there, more visible than it had ever been, less carefully managed. "I know you know," she said. "That is why I am going to go upstairs now and not do anything about it until after you have spoken to Dumbledore and slept and I have written to my grandmother and my grandmother has been appropriately horrified and I have given her the appropriate account." She moved toward the stairs. "Good night, Harry." "Good night," he said. She went up. He stood at the foot of the stairs for a moment, listening to the quiet of the castle, and then he went to find Ron, who was in the common room pretending he hadn't been waiting, and sat with him in front of the fire for 20 minutes, and Ron said, "Graveyard, then." "Graveyard," Harry confirmed. Ron was quiet for a bit. "Then, how many?" 12, Harry said. 14 in the maze and the stands. All down, all alive. Ron was quiet for a long bit. "Right," he said finally. "Right." He looked at Harry. "You're okay?" "I'm okay," Harry said. Ron nodded. That was sufficient. They sat in the fire and neither of them said anything else about it, and the castle breathed around them, and the warmth in Harry's chest was exactly what it had always been, and from this direction it pointed him toward every room in the building that was important to him, all of them at once. Chapter 6. After the fire. The summer after 4th year was the loudest silence Harry had ever sat inside. He was at Privet Drive for 3 weeks, which was the deal he'd arranged with Dumbledore before the year ended, 3 weeks, not 3 months, and the Dursleys understood this because Dumbledore had explained it to them with the specific gentle clarity of a man who has decided to stop allowing certain things to continue. Harry wasn't certain what exactly Dumbledore had said, but Uncle Vernon had looked at Harry for the remainder of that first evening with the expression of someone who has done a fresh calculation and found the result unfavorable to his previous position, and the cupboard had not been mentioned. Harry had the second bedroom. He had his books. He had Hedwig. He had the Daily Prophet arriving every morning with its careful, ministry-approved coverage of the Triwizard Tournament's finale, which described the incident as an accident involving a malfunctioning portkey and mentioned the arrest of Bartemius Crouch Jr. in the 3rd paragraph and the discovery of Peter Pettigrew, alive, imprisoned in Azkaban as of June 15, in the 4th. The Prophet did not mention the graveyard. The Prophet did not mention Death Eaters. The Prophet did not mention the bundle in the cauldron. Harry read each issue with his morning tea and catalogued what was being said versus what was not being said and then set the paper aside and worked through his summer reading list, which was his own and not Hogwarts assigned, and which had expanded significantly after the conversation with Dumbledore in May. That conversation had lasted 3 hours and gone further than any previous conversation they'd had, and Dumbledore had told him the prophecy. All of it. He'd said it in the same tone he used for everything, warm, measured, with that thread of something underneath that was not quite sadness but was adjacent, and Harry had listened to it completely and then sat with it for a minute before saying, "All right." Dumbledore had looked at him. "All right?" "I'd rather know than not know," Harry said. "I'd rather spend the next few years preparing than spend them being protected from the information I need to prepare." He looked at Dumbledore. "And I'd rather have this conversation with you than have it alone, because you know things I don't, and I'd like us to be working from the same information going forward." A long silence. "You are 14 years old," Dumbledore said, not as an objection. As a statement that was also a kind of acknowledgement. "I know," Harry said. "I've been 14 for a while. I know what it means." He paused. "What I'd like to know is what you know about the Horcruxes." The expression on Dumbledore's face in that moment was one Harry would remember for a long time, not surprise, because Dumbledore was rarely surprised, but a genuine, unguarded shift, the specific look of a man who has been careful for a very long time and has just been reminded that careful and closed are not the same thing. "How long have you known that word?" Dumbledore asked. "Since 3rd year," Harry said. "You have a book in the restricted section, behind the left case, that has a chapter on soul magic." He paused. "It doesn't say Horcrux but it describes the mechanism and the consequences. I put it together with the diary from 2nd year." He held Dumbledore's gaze. "How many are there?" They had talked for another 2 hours after that. The letters from Fleur arrived every Tuesday and Friday, which was not a schedule they'd explicitly agreed on but which had established itself organically in the first 2 weeks of summer and then held. She wrote in English with the occasional French word when the English one wasn't doing what she wanted, and she wrote the way she talked, direct, precise, dry in the places where she was being funny without flagging it, and honest in a way that had no performance in it. The first letter said, "My grandmother listened to the full account and was appropriately horrified. She has also said that what you did in the graveyard, the building of the warmth, the wave, the body bind breaking, is documented once in the primary sources as the bond achieving what she calls full activation. It is not a one-time event. It can be done again." She is writing notes. "I think she is excited, though she will not say so, because excitement is not something she permits herself before 11 in the morning." Harry wrote back, "Tell her I'll read whatever she writes. Also tell her she was right about everything she said in Dumbledore's office. I've been thinking about what she said about Dumbledore specifically and I've had a long conversation with him. Still complicated. Less managed. I think that's progress." The second letter said, "Gabrielle has asked about you 4 times in 8 days. I have told her you are fine. She wants to know if you are coming to France. I have told her probably not this summer. She is disappointed. She has also decided you are her favorite person, which I feel I should warn you about because she is 8 and relentless when she decides something." He wrote back, "I like Gabrielle. If she's anything like you she'll be terrifying by 14. Tell her I'll write to her if she wants." The third letter said, more quietly than the others, "My mother cried, as predicted. My father said very little but looked at me in the way he does when he is taking stock of something. He has read Arsenault. He asked me whether you were what I hoped. I told him you were something I hadn't known to hope for, which is different and better." He nodded and went back to his study. "I think that means he approves. With my father, silence is agreement. Noise is concern." He sat with that one for a long time before writing back. "I'd like to meet him. Eventually. I think eventually is the right word, not this summer, not because I'm not ready, but because there's a lot happening and I want to meet your family properly, not squeezed into the margins of everything else. Is that all right?" Her reply came back in 2 days instead of the usual 4, which was its own kind of answer. That is exactly right. My grandmother will want to meet you too. Properly. Not in Dumbledore's office where she is trying to make a point. A pause indicated by a small gap in the text, the space of a thought reconsidered and written anyway. I am coming back in September. Not just for the bond. Because I chose it. I have spoken to Madame Maxime about a transfer for the final year of my education, or a supervised independent study recognized by both schools. She is not happy but she understands. She has always known what the choosing means. Harry read that letter twice. Then he went downstairs and made himself dinner because it was his turn in the Privet Drive rotation, a rotation that had evolved over 3 weeks into something nearly functional, and he cooked and the warmth in his chest was doing the thing that wasn't the bond and wasn't the compass and wasn't anything ancient. It was just his. 5th year began at platform 9 3/4 with a new Dada teacher whose name Harry learned before he reached the train because it was on every parent's lips in the crowd, Dolores Umbridge, senior undersecretary to the minister, appointed by direct ministerial order over Dumbledore's head because the ministry had decided that Hogwarts staff appointments required oversight, which was a sentence that meant several other things depending on who was saying it. Ron had heard it from his father. Hermione had researched it over the summer, coming back to Hogwarts with 3 feet of notes and an expression that oscillated between fury and the determined calm of someone who has accepted an unpleasant reality and is preparing to deal with it. Hermione's magic, Harry had learned in their first letters of the summer, was holding. Not improving, the 4-inch Accio was still a 4-inch Accio and the generalized suppression was still present, but not worsening either. Madame Delacour's guidance about cessation of triggering behavior had drawn a clear line and Hermione had held that line with the same precision she held every line she decided was important. She had also, Harry noted from her letters, been doing what she'd been doing in their last library session of 4th year but directing it at the gap in her own capability, working around it. Using her mind to compensate for what her wand couldn't currently do. The result was that she was, if anything, more effective than she'd been in 4th year, just differently effective. He thought about what Madame Delacour had said, "You are not your magic, child," and thought that Hermione had heard that the way she heard things that were hard to hear, with initial resistance and eventual, thorough integration. Fleur was on the platform. He saw her before he saw anyone else, which was not entirely the bond. She was difficult not to see, being who she was, but the warmth helped. She was with Madame Maxime, who was holding paperwork for McGonagall, and she was in regular traveling clothes and not Beauxbatons robes, which meant the transfer was happening, and she looked across the platform and found him immediately and there was nothing performed in either direction. Just recognition, and a nod that said later, when the logistics are handled, and Harry nodded back and went to find Ron. Ron said, "She's here," in the tone of someone confirming something he'd known for weeks. "She's here," Harry confirmed. "Right," Ron said. "Good." He paused. "Also Hermione's over there with a stack of parchment that's concerning me." They found Hermione, collected their luggage, located Neville who was in conversation with a girl Harry recognized from herbology named Hannah Abbott, and boarded the train, and the year began. Umbridge's first class happened on a Thursday. Harry had been preparing for it since August, and preparing for it meant he'd read the educational decrees she'd been instrumental in drafting, had talked to Arthur Weasley about the ministry's internal politics, and had arrived at a working theory about what this year was designed to accomplish, which was, suppress the narrative about Voldemort's return, which the ministry could not afford to acknowledge without admitting it had failed. The mechanism would be control of information. The target would be anyone saying things the ministry found inconvenient. The first and most visible target would be Harry Potter. He told Fleur this at dinner on Wednesday. She looked at him over her pottage. She was eating at the Gryffindor table as a matter of course now, the result of a quiet conversation between Dumbledore and McGonagall about appropriate arrangements for a visiting student, and the Gryffindors had stopped registering it as unusual within about 4 days, and said, "You're going to say something in her first class." "I'm going to say something accurate in her first class," Harry said. "There's a difference." "There is not," in the context of a class run by someone who works for people trying to suppress accurate things. That's the point, he said. She looked at him. Then she looked at Ron, who had the expression of someone watching a chess game he isn't playing but can see several moves ahead on. He's going to, Ron told her. I know, she said. I am trying to decide whether to be concerned or interested. Bit of both, Ron offered. That is what I expected, she said, and went back to her pottage. The class was pink in the way that only a very specifically unpleasant environment is pink, not warm or cheerful but relentless, and underneath the relentlessness something precise and small. Umbridge herself was small and pink and delivered her opening remarks in a voice that had the quality of something very sweet that has gone slightly off. She explained that they would be following a ministry-approved theoretical curriculum and that there would be no practical wand work. Harry put his hand up. How are we supposed to defend ourselves against dark wizards without practical experience? The class was very quiet. Umbridge looked at him with the expression she had apparently prepared for exactly this moment. I don't think there's any need for students to face dark wizards in practice, Mr. Potter, she said, with a smile that did not reach her eyes by a considerable margin. You may be under the impression that certain recent events require. Last year, Harry said, I was taken to a graveyard by a Death Eater who had spent the year impersonating our Dada professor. In that graveyard, Voldemort was attempting to restore himself to full power. I escaped because I had practical dueling experience. He kept his voice level. I'm happy to discuss that in detail if the Ministry's position is that it didn't happen. The silence that followed was different from the silence before. It was the silence of 30 students recalibrating the entire room. Umbridge's smile went through a very subtle change. It was still a smile. It was no longer pretending to be pleasant. Detention, Mr. Potter, she said. Tonight. All right, Harry said. He sat back. He didn't break eye contact with her. What page of the textbook are we starting on? Fleur, who had not been placed in 5th year Dada but had heard the account 3 hours later in the library, said, she gave you detention immediately. Yes, Harry said. And you went. Of course. Refusing wouldn't have accomplished anything. He turned a page. I wanted to know what the detention involved. And? He showed her his hand. She looked at the words carved there, I must not tell lies, and her expression did something that was very still and very cold and then resolved back into composure. But the cold was still underneath. She used a blood quill on you, she said. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. That is illegal. Yes. Are you going to report it? I've written to Amelia Bones already, Harry said. She's minister now. Fudge resigned in July, you probably saw that. Bones replaced him. She deals in facts. He looked at Fleur. I also kept the parchment. Evidence. Fleur looked at the words on his hand again. Then she looked at him and said, she is going to do it again. Probably, Harry said. Harry, she's going to push until she finds the thing that works, Harry said. The blood quill is already documented and reported. If she does it again it's a second piece of evidence on top of the first. He held her gaze. I'm not going to let her scare me into being quiet, and I'm not going to give her a reaction she can use. What I'm going to do is document everything she does, continue saying accurate things in class, and wait for Amelia Bones to finish reading her mail. Fleur looked at him for a long moment. You are the most infuriating person, she said, which from her register was a compliment and also not quite only a compliment. Second most, Harry said. You won that in September. She threw her quill at him, which was the most openly playful thing she'd done in 5 months, and it bounced off his shoulder and he caught it on the rebound and handed it back and the warmth in his chest was doing the delight thing it had started doing in 4th year and had not stopped. The DA happened because it was necessary, and it happened the way necessary things tend to happen. Someone said it out loud in the Hog's head and the thing that had been building became a plan. Harry stood on the pub's second floor with 15 people who had come because they wanted to learn and said, "I'm going to teach you actual defensive magic. Not theory. Not a textbook. The real thing." He looked around the group. Ron on his left. Hermione on his right with her wand and her limitations and her determination which, if anything, had become more formidable in the last year. Neville, who had grown something in the summer, not taller, particularly, but settled, like he'd found the bottom of himself and was standing on it. Luna Lovegood, who had been impossible to predict from the first moment Harry met her and whom he had accordingly decided to trust. Fred and George, who were not here to learn to duel and were here for every other reason. The rest, Hufflepuffs and Ravenclaws and a few more Gryffindors, all of them having come because what Harry had said in Umbridge's class had been heard. "You want to know if I can actually teach this," Harry said. Reasonable question. He looked at the group. "Last year I faced 14 Death Eaters in a graveyard." He said it simply. The year before that, a fully Dementor-protected Azkaban prisoner, a werewolf, and the spirit of Voldemort attached to a man's head. The year before that, a 60-foot basilisk. He paused. "I'm not telling you this to impress you. I'm telling you because you should know what kind of preparation is actually useful, and it's not the kind Umbridge is offering." The room was very quiet. Neville said, "What do we start with?" "Shields," Harry said. "Because a fight you don't take damage in is a fight you can keep fighting." He taught them. It was different from being taught. He understood things about the mechanics of spells from having used them under pressure that the textbooks didn't capture, and he found he could explain them that way, in terms of what they needed to feel like rather than what they needed to look like, and people who had been struggling with Expelliarmus for a year suddenly had it working on their first or second try. Hermione assisted. Her own shield charm on herself remained strong, and she moved through the group correcting stances and wand angles with the precision of someone who had been thinking about how to teach for much longer than they'd had the opportunity to do it. Harry watched her with someone else's stunner skimming over her shoulder and the shield absorbing it cleanly, and he thought, "She has found another way to be what she is." And he thought about Madame Delacour's letter, which had arrived in October with 5 pages of notes on the bond's release mechanism, which he had read twice and put in his desk drawer, and which he had been thinking about every day since. Not yet. But soon. Fleur came to 3 of the early DA sessions. She was not technically a Hogwarts student in the formal 5th-year sense and so was not technically affected by Umbridge's educational decrees, but she was in the castle under Madame Maxime's study agreement and she came because she wanted to and because Neville had asked her directly if she would come and she had said yes. She did not teach. She participated. She let Harry lead, which, he recognized this, was a choice she made deliberately, because Fleur was entirely capable of leading any room she stood in and chose not to hear. It was the kind of thing he noticed and didn't make a thing of, and she noticed that he noticed, and that was its own conversation conducted entirely without words. Umbridge came for the DA in February. Harry had known it was coming. There was an informant, Marietta Edgecombe, whose mother worked for the ministry and whose attendance had always had the particular quality of someone who is present at something and is also cataloguing it. Hermione had put a jinx on the sign-up parchment in October and when Umbridge arrived with her inquisitorial squad and Marietta Edgecombe in tow, Marietta's face had the word sneak across it in purple pustules and even Umbridge had to pause. Harry had already moved the practice space. The Hog's Head records were clean. The room of requirement, which they'd moved to in November, had been cleared of anything useful. When Umbridge arrived, she found a room full of students who had been practicing a cheering charm for the past hour and whose sign-up parchment was for a study group and whose attendance, such as it was, looked entirely voluntary and entirely benign. Umbridge looked at Harry. Harry looked at Umbridge. She had the expression of someone who knows they've been outmaneuvered and is deciding how to respond. "Mr. Potter," she said. "I'd like a word." "Of course, Professor," Harry said. In her office, which was even more pink than the classroom and contained a suspicious number of plates with moving kittens on them. Umbridge sat across her desk and looked at Harry with the smile that wasn't a smile and said, "I know about your little group." "I know you know," Harry said. "That's why I moved it 3 months ago." A pause. "You moved it when the Hog's Head became a security risk." He met her eyes. "I've been running study sessions in the room of requirement since November. We've been studying the cheering charm. Tonight was particularly productive." He paused. "Is there something specific you were looking for?" Umbridge's smile held. "Barely. I have very broad authority in this school, Mr. Potter." "I know," Harry said. "Educational Decree 26, 27, 28, and the Inquisitorial Amendment." He said the numbers the way Hermione said them, from having read them, not from having been told about them. "They give you authority over student organizations, student publications, and student communications with outside parties. The Cheering Charm study group is none of those things. It's 6 students and a textbook." He paused. "Unless the ministry is now regulating voluntary academic study, in which case I expect that's in the Daily Prophet." The silence in the pink office was very precise. Umbridge stood. Harry stood. She was shorter than him now, he'd grown in the summer and she was not a tall person, and she looked up at him with the specific expression of someone who has been consistently frustrated by the same obstacle and is running out of mechanisms. "I'm going to find what you're hiding," she said. "And when I do, I hope you do find it," Harry said. "Because what I'm hiding is students learning to defend themselves, and if the ministry's position is that that's prohibited, I'd be very interested to have that documented publicly." He moved toward the door. "Is there anything else?" She said nothing. He left. He walked back to Gryffindor Tower and the warmth in his chest was the settled note, the long ring of the bell after the strike, and he thought about the graveyard and the maze and the mirror chamber in first year and all the small moments along the way that had been leading here, and he thought, she is going to overreach soon, and when she does, it needs to be in front of people. She overreached in March. It happened in the corridor outside the Transfiguration classroom, which was perhaps the worst possible location for someone attempting to exercise authority, being as it was directly outside McGonagall's door and within earshot of her office window which was often open. Umbridge had heard, through the Inquisitorial Squad's network, that Harry had been involved in a duel with a 6th-year Slytherin who had attempted to hex Neville from behind. This was accurate. Harry had stopped it, which was also accurate, and the method he'd used had been a shield charm followed by a straightforward Expelliarmus which had sent the 6th-year's wand about 12 feet down the corridor. Clean. Proportional. Witnessed by 8 students. Umbridge arrived in the corridor with Crabbe and Goyle Sr. of the Inquisitorial Squad and her wand out, which was the part that was a mistake. "Mr. Potter," she said. "I'm confiscating your wand pending an investigation into the unauthorized use of magic against a student." "I used a shield charm and Expelliarmus," Harry said. "Both defensive. Neither caused injury. The incident is documented by 8 witnesses." He looked at her wand, which was pointed at him. "Are you about to use magic on me, Professor?" "Your wand," she said. "I'd like to know," Harry said, calmly, not moving, "whether you're about to cast a spell on me. Because if you are, I'd like McGonagall and anyone else in earshot to hear that that's what's happening." Down the corridor, 3 students stopped. One of them was Neville. One was Luna. One was a 5th-year Ravenclaw whose name Harry didn't know but who had his wand out and was writing in the air with a quick quotes quill, the smart kind that took down what was actually said rather than what the user wanted said. Umbridge's eyes went to the quick quotes quill. Her smile had an entirely different quality now, thinner, higher, the smile of someone who has realized they have stepped into something. She cast anyway. She pointed her wand at Harry and said the incantation for a binding jinx, the kind that wrapped around a target and immobilized them, and the jinx was strong and it was fast and it came from someone who had been using magic for a very long time. It hit Harry and stopped. It didn't reflect. It didn't explode. It simply stopped, the way the bodybind in the graveyard had stopped, and the warmth in Harry's chest did the wave thing, not the full wave, not the graveyard-level building, but a pulse of it, a single strong beat, and Umbridge's wand went out. Not flew away, not snapped. The magic in it went out, the way a match goes out in water, and Umbridge was standing in the corridor holding a wand that had just stopped being a wand in any functional sense and was now a piece of wood. The silence in the corridor was total. Umbridge stared at the wand. Tried it. Nothing. Tried again. Nothing. The wood was intact. The magic was gone, or rather, had turned away from her, and the expression on her face moved through disbelief and confusion and landed on something she would not have said out loud, which was fear. Harry looked at her. He kept his voice very level. "Are you all right, Professor?" She stared at him. Her wand hand was shaking. "What you just attempted," Harry said, "was a binding jinx cast on a student, which is documented by 3 witnesses and a quick quotes quill. I believe that falls under the unauthorized use of magic on a minor, which is," he reached into his robe pocket, where he had a card with relevant educational law on it because Hermione had written out the relevant clauses in September, Section 4 of the Educational Act, 1958, as amended in 1991. The amendment specifically includes staff members. Down the corridor, McGonagall's office door opened. McGonagall looked at the scene, Umbridge with a non-functional wand, Harry standing, 3 witnesses, a quick quotes quill. She looked at it for approximately 2 seconds. "Dolores," she said. Her voice was the voice she used when she had already decided something and was simply announcing it. "I think you should come inside." Amelia Bones' response to Harry's October letter about the blood quill arrived in March, which was ministerial pace, but it arrived with the full weight of the new ministry behind it. Bones had spent 6 months building a case that did not rely on Harry Potter's word alone but on documentation, cross-referenced reports from 4 students who had also experienced Umbridge's detentions, and a wand examination that confirmed the blood quill's magical signature. The March incident in the corridor was the second strike, documented and witnessed and recorded by a quick quotes quill that did not lie. The combination of the 2 landed Umbridge's appointment under formal review within a week of McGonagall's report. She did not leave immediately. She was the sort of person who did not leave immediately, who appealed and filed objections and spoke to journalists and maintained her smile through all of it. But she stopped teaching. She stopped walking the corridors. She stopped running the inquisitorial squad, which collapsed on its own within a week of losing its authority because most of its members had joined for the authority and were not interested in it for any other reason. Harry watched all of this happen and did not celebrate it publicly, which was a deliberate choice. Fleur noticed this and said so, over dinner one evening in early April. "You're not enjoying it," she said. "I'm satisfied it's resolved," Harry said. "That's different. Most people would enjoy watching someone like her lose the thing she was using to hurt people." "I'm glad it's over," Harry said. But she believed what she was doing was right. She believed Voldemort wasn't back and that the ministry needed to protect itself from destabilizing narratives and that I was a troubled child who needed management. She was wrong about all of it, but she believed it. He paused. "People who believe wrong things and act on them are more frightening to me than people who know they're doing harm and do it anyway. Because you can't reason with the first kind." Fleur was quiet for a moment. "That is a very mature thing to say about someone who carved words into your hand." "She hurt me with a bureaucracy first," Harry said. "The blood quill was just the part one could document." She looked at him. Then she reached across the table, not looking at it, and put her hand briefly over his, the one that still had the faint silver scar on the back, "I must not tell lies," in slightly raised tissue, and pressed once and let go. The gesture was exactly what it was. Brief, deliberate, present. He looked at her. "It is still yours," she said. He knew she wasn't talking about the hand. May arrived in a blaze of late spring warmth and with it came the OWLS, which Hermione had been preparing for since September with an intensity that was, Harry thought, less about the tests and more about the proof. She needed to know what remained. What her magic, diminished as it was still capable of. He watched her come out of the charms practical in the second week of May with her chin up and her eyes clear and something in her expression that was not triumph. She was too honest for triumph when she wasn't certain, but was the particular look of someone who has found their footing in uncertain ground. "How did it go?" he asked. "The practical casting was limited," she said. "Where I knew it would be limited." She paused. "But the theory component," she stopped. Started again. "I know why the spells work. I know the mechanics underneath them better than I've ever known anything, because I had to understand the mechanics to work around what my wand won't do anymore. And the examiner asked 3 questions that were not on the standard paper and I answered all 3. A pause. "I think I may have taught her something about the third one." Harry smiled. "Good. It's not the same," Hermione said quietly. "What I could do before and what I can do now. I know that." "No," he said. "It's not. But it's not nothing, either." "Not remotely nothing," Harry said. "You kept a room full of people learning defensive magic this entire year. You found the blood quill documentation before the Ministry knew what to look for. You translated Arsinoe well enough that Fleur only had to correct 3 passages." He held her gaze. "Hermione. You are not diminished. You are differently shaped. Those are not the same thing." She looked at him. For a moment, just briefly, the composure was not present, or rather it was present but transparent, and underneath it was something that had been carrying a very heavy weight for a very long time and was, perhaps, setting some of it down. "I've been thinking," Harry said, "about the release." He watched her face. "What Madame Delacour wrote about. The mechanism. I've been reading her notes since October." Hermione went very still. "You're going to do it?" "I think so. I'm not certain yet." He looked at his hands. "I want you to know that I'm thinking about it. Because it affects you, and you deserve to know." She was quiet for a long time. Then, "What does it require from you?" "Intent," he said. "Genuine intent. An acceptance of the vulnerability that goes with releasing the protection." He paused. "Madame Delacour said it takes someone who has decided that the cost to another person outweighs the benefit to themselves. Which is," he stopped. Looked for the words. "Which is just what I think is right, actually. You're not that person anymore. You haven't been for a year. What happened to your magic was from something you used to do, not from who you are now." Hermione looked at the table. Then at him. Her eyes were very steady. "And what do you need from me?" "Nothing," he said. "It's not, the book is clear that it's entirely on the chosen. You don't have to do anything." "But I'd like to be there," she said. "If you're going to do it." "I was going to do it tonight," Harry said. "After dinner." "Then I'll be there," she said, and her voice was exactly what it always was, precise, direct, without inflection. But underneath, he heard it. The thing that was not quite hope but was its nearest neighbor. That evening, in Harry's room with the window open and the May air moving through the curtains, Harry and Fleur and Hermione and Ron sat in 4 chairs arranged in a rough circle and Harry read Madame Delacour's notes for the last time. Ron had been told about the release in February and had taken it the way Ron took most things that were large and emotionally complex, with a long silence, a careful question, and then a straightforward commitment to being present for whatever happened next. He sat in his chair with his elbows on his knees and looked at the floor with the expression of someone who is paying careful attention and trying not to show it. "The mechanics," Fleur said. She had read the notes 3 times herself. "You say it clearly. You say it with full knowledge of what it means. The intent carries the release." "Yes," Harry said. She looked at him. The silver eyes were very clear in the evening light. You're certain? I'm certain, he said. She nodded. She put her hand in her lap and didn't say anything else, because there was nothing else to say, and Fleur understood when things had been said fully. Harry looked at his hands. He thought about Piers' polekiss in the schoolyard and the bell sound that had been the beginning. He thought about the gold light in the cupboard and Ollivander's tuning fork and the wave in the graveyard. He thought about Hermione in the library with her wand and the 4-inch Accio and the look on her face. He thought about all of it, clearly, holding it without any part of it being the wrong shape, and then he let it go. He said, out loud, into the room that was just 4 people and the May evening, I release it. Fully. Freely. I accept the cost. She is not that person and the protection is no longer needed. The warmth in his chest did something he had not expected. It did not diminish. He had thought releasing the protection would feel like a loss, and it didn't. It felt like an expansion, like something that had been coiled and directed outward suddenly able to move in all directions simultaneously. The coal was still there, patient and steady, entirely his own, and it was not smaller. It was just, no longer deployed. No longer pointed outward in protection. Just warm. In the room, something shifted. It was not dramatic. There was no light, no sound, no physical sensation for anyone except, Harry thought from her expression, Hermione. She looked at her wand, which was in her lap. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she held it up and said, Accio, and pointed it at the book on the desk. The book flew across the room and landed in her hand. Clean. Fast. Full strength. She stared at it. Then she looked up at Harry. And the expression on her face was the one she almost never let happen, wide open, unguarded, the expression of a person who has just received something they had stopped believing they were allowed to hope for. Harry, she said, and it was only his name, but it had everything in it. Don't thank me, he said. You did the actual work. I just updated the conditions. She looked at him for another moment. Then she turned away and pressed her free hand briefly over her eyes, and when she turned back she was composed again, but it was the composition of someone who is very full rather than someone who is very contained, and it was entirely different. Ron reached over and put his hand on her shoulder and she let him leave it there, which was its own kind of thing. Fleur looked at Harry. He looked at her. The warmth in his chest was what it had always been, and it was also, now, freer than it had ever been, because it had never been entirely his own until this moment. The bond was there, ancient and unrevocable, a resonance in the magical signature that the blood had always known. But the thing he felt for her was separate from that, and it had been making up its mind for almost 2 years, and it was done making up its mind. Come on, he said, standing up. He held out his hand. She looked at it. Looked at him. Where? Outside, he said. It's May. The grounds are good. She took his hand. They went outside, down through the castle's evening corridors and out onto the grounds where the light was still in the west and the lake was the color of silver and the forbidden forest was dark and alive at the edge of the grounds, and they walked in the long grass and said things that are private, which is to say they said everything. The year ended in June with OWL results and summer plans and the particular collective exhale of a school that has survived something. Umbridge's replacement arrived quietly, a retired Auror named Dawlish whose classes were functional and unremarkable and exactly what Dada was supposed to be, which was sufficient. Amelia Bones came to Hogwarts in the last week of term and met with Dumbledore and Harry and 4 other witnesses from the DA in the context of a formal ministry review, and the meetings were efficient and the documentation was clean and Bones told Harry, at the end of the last one, that Peter Pettigrew's trial had been set for September and that his testimony would be required. I'll be there, Harry said. Bones looked at him with the expression she always had, the evaluating look of someone who deals in facts and has just confirmed that a fact she'd been told is accurate. You handled this year well, she said. Not warmly. Factually. It was more valuable for being factual. Thank you, Harry said. Ron was going home to the burrow. Hermione was going to her parents' house with her wand and her restored magic, and what Harry suspected was a very long conversation ahead of her with her mother and father about what the last 5 years had actually been. Neville was going to his grandmother, who Harry had met once at an Auror event and who was exactly the grandmother Neville had always needed to become exactly who he was becoming. Fleur was going home to France for July. Harry stood on the platform at King's Cross and she stood across from him, and the crowd moved around them, and she said, "I'll be back in August." "I know," he said. She looked at him. "You could come to France," she said. He looked at her. He looked at the platform. He thought about Perpignan and a stone house that smelled of lavender oil and a grandmother with silver eyes and 8-year-old Gabrielle who had been writing him letters since October and who had sent him a drawing of a dragon at Christmas that he had put on his wall. "Yeah," he said. "All right." She almost smiled. Then it became something more than almost. Full, real, unhurried, entirely hers. He had never seen that before, the full version of the smile she usually kept managed. It was, he thought, the best thing he had seen. "August," she said. "August," he agreed. She boarded the Beauxbatons transport, a powder blue carriage that had appeared at the far end of the station in a way that made Muggle passengers look confused, and she was gone, and the warmth in his chest was the coal, and it was the compass, and it was the settled note of the long ringing bell, and it was, finally, something he had chosen fully and that had fully chosen him. Harry picked up his trunk. Hedwig clicked at him from her cage. He looked around the platform, at Ron and the Weasleys gathering in a familiar, loud cluster, at Hermione who was finding her parents in the crowd with an expression that was already working up to the long conversation, at Neville who was getting a hug from his grandmother that she was giving properly, the way she hadn't always. He walked toward the exit. The world was loud and complicated and full of things that were not finished, Voldemort incomplete in a graveyard in Little Hangleton, the Ministry still finding its feet under new management, a prophecy that had been spoken before he was born and that he had been thinking about, clearly and without flinching, since the night Dumbledore told him. The world was all of that. It was also May becoming June becoming summer. It was also the grounds of Hogwarts with the lake silver in the evening and someone beside him who had crossed a great hall because she decided to. It was also Ron's laugh, which was large and genuine and worth protecting, and Hermione's Accio landing clean, and Neville finding the bottom of himself and standing on it. It was also, and most specifically, the warmth in his chest, which had no more managing to do and no more warning to give and no more wave to build, and which had settled into something patient and permanent and entirely without fear. He walked out of the station into the London morning and he did not look back.